99. The white python's body is as slender as a woman's. Its wings are not too big. They are transparent and crystal clear. If you don't look carefully, it is almost impossible to notice them. It is hard to imagine that flapping its wings can make it rise from the stone plateau outside the cliff. It is inevitable that people will speculate whether it has mastered some kind of magic that is similar to the floating magic of chi trainers. However, all of this was meaningless now. After the white python arched its back, it quickly swooped down and opened its bloody mouth in an attempt to swallow the delicate and pretty maidservant Zhu Lu. Unexpectedly, a blade-wielding youth appeared out of nowhere, using the black python's back and head as a ladder and a springboard. He leaped over with a single leap, and the hatchet in his hand just happened to strike the connection between the white python's wings and body. The white python needs the pair of wings to fly and control the direction. After the wings are chopped off, its body continues to move forward by inertia. However, it immediately moves more than 10 feet away. The white python's bloody mouth just brushes past the girl's shoulder, and its whole body falls heavily on the stone plateau. Zhu Lu and the 3 students behind her also escape the disaster. Taking advantage of the time when the white python is dizzy after hitting the ground, Li Baoping quickly carries the book box and yells to run. Lin Shuyi silently picks up the luggage and follows behind. Li Huai has already been scared out of his wits. After running for some distance, he inadvertently finds that the annoying Zhu Lu is not there. When he turns his head, Li Huai is stunned. The girl is standing there stupidly. Isn't she just waiting to be killed? Li Huai can't help but shout loudly, "Zhu Lu, why are you still not running?" Zhu Lu finally shivers and comes back to her senses. However, she is still a little confused. She turns her head and looks at Li Huai in a daze. She sees the child running and shouting, "Run! Are you waiting to die?" Once Zhu Lu came back to her senses, she immediately displayed the lithe posture of a martial artist at the peak of the second realm. In 4 or 5 steps, she had reached Li Huai's side and retreated with them to an area far away from the white python. As expected, just as Zhu Lu left her original spot, the white python, with blood gushing out from its broken wings, began to struggle violently in pain. Its tail swung wildly, smashing the stone ground and sending rocks flying everywhere. If Zhu Lu had been even a moment later, she might have been smashed into a pile of minced meat by the python's tail, which was as thick as a water bucket. After losing one of its wings, the white python's vitality seemed to have been greatly damaged. It flailed around wildly, splashing up countless sand and stones. It did not calm down for a long time. However, the young man was not much better off. The palm of his left hand, which was holding the hatchet, was split open and covered in blood. Chen Pinggan knelt on one knee and raised his arm to wipe away the sweat on his forehead to avoid blurring his vision. Half of the hatchet had already been broken. When the bright blade rebounded, if Chen Pinggan had not reacted quickly and turned his head, perhaps half of the hatchet would have pierced his face. At the very least, a large piece of flesh would have been scraped off from his cheek. Chen Pinggan's current position formed a triangular formation with the black snake and the white python. The black snake's behavior was strange. After seeing that the white python had been seriously injured, it did not hurriedly abandon Zhu He and run to fight Chen Pinggan. Instead, it was more leisurely and calm than before. It leisurely swayed its upper body and maintained a confrontational posture with Zhu He. The black snake's pair of gloomy silver-white eyes occasionally fell on the white python's body. Its gaze was no different from the way the white python looked at the young girl Zhu Lu, as if she was a delicacy on a plate. In the middle of the stone platform, the white-clothed old man held a green bamboo cane and trembled. The half of the hatchet happened to be inserted into the ground not far from his feet. The old man approached on tiptoe, squatted down, and used the pad of his finger to carefully wipe the blade. Instantly, a trace of golden yellow blood flowed out from his finger. The old man was so scared that he quickly retracted his hand. He bent his finger again and gently tapped the blade. His face was full of doubt. He twirled his snow-white beard with 2 fingers and muttered, "Unparalleled sharpness. It deserves the reputation of being unparalleled sharpness. But unexpectedly, it's just an ordinary hatchet. It can't even be called 100 times a warrior's blade. Therefore, The blade is extremely brittle and far from being tough enough. If the blade matched the quality of the blade, and it was given to that straightforward man who only knew martial arts as a weapon, he might not necessarily have no chance of winning. But now, everything is settled. The old man carefully sized up the bright and beautiful edge of the blade. He sighed with emotion and said, "As for the mystery of this hatchet, it can only be found on that young man's whetstone. But the problem is, how good of a whetstone must be to be able to sharpen a cheap hatchet made of inferior materials into such a sharp edge?" The old man's gaze was somewhat greedy and hot. He secretly looked at Zhu Lu and Li Baoping's wicker basket. Unsurprisingly, the whetstone was hidden in it. The old man then sighed heavily. No matter how good the item was, even if he could get it, it seemed that he would not have the life to enjoy it now. The only thing he hated was the fact that the fifth realm martial artist had used the earth turning into mountain incantation at the behest of gods and devils. It was originally a mountain-splitting technique that had been lost for countless years. At that time, the old man had been hiding underground, thinking that it was a joke to look at someone scribbling. In the end, he had fallen into this big tumble. In fact, this mountain opening technique of earth turning into mountain formula was not very brilliant. It was just that this kind of technique had been silent for too long. In the years when the old man was the landlord of Chiduan Mountain, he was only invited out of the mountain mansion once by someone with this technique. It was the two immortals who came to the mountaintop to play chess. Of course, those two were true immortals of the land who had great skills. A small fifth realm warrior was not even worthy to carry their shoes. The reason why he was called to the mountaintop back then was that the two true immortals did not want to break some old rules. They did not care about the face of a small landlord of Chiduan Mountain. It was not that Chen Pingan did not want to take the opportunity to get rid of the white python. It was really that his internal organs were in a mess, making him unable to do anything more. After wiping away the sweat, it would soon cover his face again. Chen Pingan simply did not waste any more energy. He just kept adjusting his breathing and tried to calm the chaotic aura in his body. This kind of adjustment was like trying to mend a leaky window on a rainy day. The sound of the drum once again resounded from his chest. The sound gradually grew louder and louder. The sound did not enter his ears. Instead, it was like a mysterious inner voice. It was clearly transmitting the trembling of his body and the wailing of his soul. The teenager's almost instinctive intuition first came from the colic in Mud Bottle Alley when he was young. Later, he experienced it again on the mountain. The reason why he did not roll on the ground this time was that Chen Pingan noticed that the strange aura in his body was like a fire dragon. It began to flow upstream from his abdomen. Wherever it passed, whether it was the Qi Mansion aperture acupoints that he recognized from Song Jisin's wooden puppet or the meridians that connected the critical points of the human body, it reduced the pain to a great extent. It was like a general leading troops to quell a rebellion, or the so-called imperial troops in Song Jisin's novel. The effect was remarkable. Although it could not solve the root cause, it could at least make the rebels avoid the sharp edge. Although Zhu's injury was not light, his momentum did not decrease. Instead, it increased. His vigorous fighting spirit was high and his two sleeves were fluttering. He had the demeanor of a grandmaster who could not be underestimated. The black snake, whose abdomen was slowly slithering on the edge of the stone platform, narrowed its eyes. Even though he showed great fighting strength, it was not anxious. It shook its head vigorously from side to side, as if it was looking for a loophole. In this way, it gave Zhu a great opportunity to suppress his injury. Seeing this, the old man hesitated for a moment. He still weakly reminded, "Don't struggle. The reason why this evil creature is not in a hurry to eat you is that it wants you to completely stimulate your qi and blood. It is just waiting for a green fruit to ripen. Don't think that it can't do anything to you. Otherwise, even if it swallows your body, it still can't digest your essence, qi, and spirit. You should know that it is the real tonic." The old man sighed and began to tidy up his messy hair and tattered clothes. He said self-deprecatingly, "In any case, this is a piece of land. Before I die, I should at least look like a mountain god." The old man sat on the ground and sneered as he cleaned up. "By the way, The evil beast is not only physically strong but also agile in its movements. More than 100 years ago, it swallowed a Taoist chi cultivator with the cultivation of the middle fifth floor. Now, I reckon that it should have at least cultivated one or two kinds of rudimentary Taoist techniques. Although it's said to be superficial, when it's used by this evil beast, I'm afraid that even if you have a physique of the fifth level, you won't be able to withstand it. After all, you guys are unlucky to have a martial artist of the fifth level leading the team into the mountain. If it were the sixth level, although the two evil beasts could still defeat you, they might not be willing to come out of the cave for fear that both sides would suffer. If it were the seventh level, hey, they would have taken the initiative to give way for dozens of miles. The young girl Zhu Lu was horrified. After hearing this, she was completely disheartened. Lin Shuyi muttered to himself, "Alliance, where is Senior Alliance?" Li Huai suddenly found that Li Baoping was quietly rummaging through the book box. After taking out a small porcelain bottle, she held it tightly in her palm. Following her line of sight, Chen Pinggan calmly nodded at them from afar. Li Huai suddenly envied the tacit understanding between Li Baoping and her youngest uncle. According to the book, this was called telepathy. When Zhu He heard the old man divulging the heaven's secret, he didn't show any fear on his face. He twisted his wrist and said with a smile, "Being cowardly and cowardly means death. Being free and having a good fight also means death. Since I'm going to die anyway, who cares if I become a stepping stone for that evil beast to transform into a dragon?" A fifth-level martial artist already had the qualifications to be praised as a master of the martial Tao. His soul was strong and his spirit was sturdy. He only needed to condense a martial courage. Zhu He was trapped in a situation of certain death and had no intention of retreating. In fact, this was in line with the true meaning of the martial Tao's principle of facing death to build martial courage. It was just that he still needed to continue tempering and polishing. His martial aura had already reached its peak. He was ready to go. In an instant, the black snake changed from its previously leisurely and lazy appearance. It was as if it was certain that He was not holding back. Its soul was already boiling in its qi mansion. As the qi and blood quickly circulated throughout its body, it could finally taste this delicious food. The black snake raised its head and opened its mouth at the same time, gradually revealing two terrifying ivory fangs. It was as thick as a young man's arm. Compared to the white python's filthy appearance, the black snake that had the potential to become a divine creature, the inky flood dragon, was much cleaner. The inside of its mouth was snow-white, and waves of cold air flowed out. The stark contrast between the two colors of black and white made this intelligent creature look extremely dignified. Compared to the sloppy old man, it looked more like a genuine god of the earth and mountain. The black snake suddenly launched an attack. This time, it didn't try to show weakness by bashing its head against Zhu's head. In an instant, it opened its mouth as wide as it could. It looked as if it was about to bite down on Zhu's head, but in reality, it spat out a mouthful of extremely stinky, snow-white miasma. The miasma condensed into a solid substance and shot towards the ground like a crossbow arrow. Zhu was born and raised in a small town and was the son of the Li family. He did not have much actual combat experience. In his martial arts career, he had mostly sparred with the ancestors of his family. This was the first time he had encountered a life-and-death battle. However, after suffering a great loss from the evil beast's diversion tactic, Zhu knew that the sinister and treacherous black snake was a treacherous person. His figure moved accordingly, and he would never again meet force with force. Just as expected, the icy miasma that was as sharp as an arrow missed and shattered the stone ground. Zhu moved a few steps to the side and immediately felt a strong gust of wind sweeping towards him from the side. It was the same two attacks from before. Zhu had long since anticipated this. He pushed off the ground with the tip of his foot and instead of retreating, he charged straight towards the black snake's abdomen. Unexpectedly, the black snake leaned back and spat out mouthfuls of miasma. Its intention wasn't to pierce through Zhu's body but to stop him from charging forward. At the same time, its tail continued to extend until it formed a large cage around Zhu, instantly trapping Zhu and forcing him to fight like a trapped beast. After the black snake's long body had formed two full walls, It was still able to raise its tail high like a patrolling soldier, preventing Zhu He from escaping. Zhu He's reaction this time was fast enough. Before the snake could form the second circle, he was about to rise from the ground. However, just as his figure rose into the air, he was violently smashed down by the tail. Zhu He protected his head with his arms and was violently slapped back onto the stone ground. Although his internal organs weren't injured, his qi was boiling, causing his face to flush red. The soul will that circulated throughout his body had good intentions. In order to protect its master from being injured, it had no choice but to leave the established meridians and infiltrate into the flesh and skin outside. The black snake's cold silver eyes revealed a trace of a smug smile. If this martial artist was considered to be a 70% cooked delicacy before, then he was now 90% cooked. Therefore, it no longer continued to consume Yuan Qi. Instead, it opened its mouth wide and lowered its head time and time again to pounce on Zhu He. Zhu He's fists were like rainbows, nimbly twisting and turning in the beast-fighting arena. His two arms released misty blue gang qi. Every time he punched, it could split the air and cause the wind to roar. Although he was at an absolute disadvantage, Zhu He didn't show the slightest sign of weakness. His eyes were shining, and his essence, qi, and spirit were unprecedentedly abundant. The white-clothed old man's ears perked up and he clicked his tongue in wonder. Although he hadn't seen the battle with his own eyes, he could roughly guess what had happened. He thought to himself, it's a pity that a martial arts grandmaster would die halfway. He suddenly woke up with a start, as if his butt was on fire. He picked up the dim green bamboo cane and shouted to the martial artist's companions, "Someone come quickly. Anyone will do. As long as it's a boy or a girl, step on the U character that your elders made with your feet and I'll be able to escape. I won't be bound by this talisman. At that time, I'll be able to lend him a hand. I don't dare say that I'll be able to kill this evil creature, but escaping won't be difficult. Hurry up." The old man's anxious gaze wandered around the faces of those people. Lin Shuyi's lips curled into a cold smile. Li Huai was just about to summon up his courage to take a risk, but Li Baoping grabbed his arm. The old man was stunned. He stomped his feet and scolded bitterly, "Idiots who don't know what's good for them. Don't tell me you want to watch your elders exhaust themselves and die in battle. Have you bastards' consciences been eaten by dogs?" Zhu Lu's figure flashed, and she madly rushed toward the Chiduan Mountains land. In the distance, Chen Pinggan suddenly shouted with a stern expression, "Zhu Lu, don't go. If you don't help him, he'll have no way out. Maybe he'll have to fight side by side with us. If you help him, with his timid nature, he'll definitely run away. Besides, we're still not sure whether he's in cahoots with those two bastards. Don't be impulsive. From the beginning to the end, he seems to have been helping us, but have you noticed that he hasn't helped Uncle Zhu at all? How could Zhu Lu be willing to listen to Chen Pinggan's words?" She just buried her head and rushed forward. The moment Chen Pinggan opened his mouth to speak, he had already begun to rush toward the old man. His speed was not inferior to Zhu Lu's in the slightest. If there were no accidents, there was hope that the straw sandals youth would be able to stop Zhu Lu's actions. The old man's face was cloudy and uncertain. He stood in place with his green staff in hand. The white python, which had lost one of its wings, soon lay motionless on the stone platform. It was on the verge of death, as if it could no longer participate in this battle. However, when Chen Pinggan rushed toward the old man, his figure appearing a dozen steps away from its head, the white python darted forward without warning, its big mouth viciously biting at the youth. It no longer had the half-dead posture from before. Chen Pinggan abruptly stopped in his tracks and retreated backward, avoiding the white python's dangerous attack. He shouted angrily, "Zhu Lu, do you see? This evil beast also wants you to destroy Uncle Zhu's you character. That person and these two beasts might have already reached a secret agreement." Chen Pinggan's line of sight was blocked by the white python's body, so he couldn't see the white-clothed old man. However, the white python's head first looked in the direction of the young girl, and then slowly turned toward the youth, its eyes full of ridicule. At that moment, the youth was filled with resentment and disappointment. Even the fire dragon in his body, when passing through the 3 Chi Fu acupoints, Inexplicably changed from an irresistible momentum to a cautious and humble posture, the youth didn't pay attention to it. Zhu Lu, whose mind was in a mess, ran near the Yu character. With a face full of tears, she stretched out her foot and stomped around. The young girl choked with sobs. I want to save my father. I want to save him. I know, because he is my father, that's why you don't care about his life or death. The ashes on the Yu character were trampled into the soil, and finally disappeared. The Yu character was finally blurred under the girl's stomp. The white-clothed old man blankly looked down at the girl's feet, and a burst of suppressed laughter came from the depths of his throat. Hey, then, the old man raised his head and stared at the panic-stricken girl with a playful gaze. The old man casually twisted his wrist, and the green bamboo cane brought out a field of emerald-green fireflies in the air. His aged face was like a withered tree that had come back to life. The old man beamed with joy and nodded. He, I understand that you are eager to save your father. The old man's figure began to rapidly grow taller, and his face became younger and younger. His muscles and bones stretched, and a series of ear-piercing sounds like soybeans cracking was heard. The middle-aged man looked up to the sky and laughed, as if he was crying and laughing at the same time. He was extremely happy. Ha ha ha. As for these guys, you can do whatever you want with them. Of course, in the future, our relationship can't continue to be the same as it was hundreds of years ago. Don't worry, after I am conferred the title of Mountain God, I will promote you to the land here. As for the matter of your man walking on the river, I will also give him some support. After all, everyone benefits each other and participates in this grand undertaking. After saying these words, the man with the green cane had become a handsome man in his 20s. He looked at the stunned girl with a smile. Your father and I are fated. Originally, when Dali conferred the gods of various mountains and rivers on the territory this time, I took the opportunity to restore the original body of the land. But he was able to call out the name of that mister, which is really shocking. It is equivalent to helping me restore the original body of the land that was originally taken away by the immortals. To be honest, if he had written the character Yu in the opening chapter of The Mountain with Soil, I might have been the orthodox mountain god of Chiduan Mountain without being conferred the title by Dali. The man looked extremely happy. He paced slowly, waved his hand, and said with a smile, it's okay, I am very satisfied. Your father is a good person, and so are you. You are my benefactors, but it is a pity that I have to repay the kindness of a drop of water with a gushing spring. As a result, I really have no way to repay such a great favor of being conferred the title of Mountain God. The girl's face was pale. Her lips trembled, and she repeatedly murmured, you liar, you liar. The handsome man glanced at the white python and said, none of us expected my wings to be cut off. Don't expect me to compensate you for anything. I'm very poor now. The land within a radius of several hundred miles around Chiduan Mountain has long been plundered by you all. It's outrageous that I, a dignified lord of the land, am only left with a layer of land. The white python nodded meekly, revealing a rare trace of flattery. Then, it shook its head gently. The man waved the green cane in his hand and said heroically, I don't care about your lousy property. Let all the past conflicts go with the wind. Finally, he looked around and said with a smile, where is the brother you call Alliance? It is fine if he does not worship the mountain god, but he dares to sit on my throne. In the end, he even reduced the character Yu to Yu. The mountain god, who was in high spirits, suddenly looked down with a blank look. His face was full of pain and disbelief. An ordinary bamboo knife had pierced through his heart. The man in the bamboo hat stood side by side with him, but they were facing the opposite direction. The man let go of the hilt and patted the mountain god on the shoulder. He answered with a smile, are you looking for me? 100. When the man in the bamboo hat released the handle of the bamboo knife, he patted his shoulder instead. The handsome man, who had just escaped from the gates of hell, did not feel relieved. Instead, he became even more fearful. There was no longer a carefree smile on his face. He stood motionless and said in a dry voice, Senior, there was a misunderstanding today. I was rude. In fact, since this man of unknown origin could appear beside him without anyone noticing and easily pierce his heart acupoint with an ordinary bamboo knife, He was sure that he was no match for this man. Perhaps only when he became the god of Chiduan Mountain would he have the confidence to wrestle with him. Then, a thorny problem was placed in front of him. Should he stand straight and take the beating, or should he fight bravely? In fact, the moment the man's palm left the handle of the knife, the bamboo knife made of ordinary material had lost its deterrent power. As a god, even if he was just a lowly local lord, in the officialdom of a secular dynasty, he was just an official without an official position. However, a god was a god after all. For example, his golden body, which had been nurtured by countless incense, was comparable to the physique of a seventh-realm martial artist. Especially since there was no Achilles heel, even if he was stabbed in the back by the bamboo knife, it would not be a big deal. However, the more indifferent the man in the bamboo hat named Alliance was, the more uneasy he felt. He still remembered that when the two real immortals of the land who came to this mountain destroyed his golden body with their supreme supernatural powers. At that time, the two people's aura and appearance were also so understated. It was even far inferior to any of the moves they made in the chess game. After Alliance attacked, he returned to his cynical manner. He took off the small gourd at his waist and shook it gently. The fragrance of the wine spread. Alliance drank a mouthful of strong wine and walked around the young and handsome local lord. He clicked his tongue and said, "You're quite good at acting." Of course, that white python was not bad either. Together with the violent black snake, their cooperation was flawless. However, your true feelings after you thought that you had succeeded were more to my taste. 3 laughs, very wonderful. I like it. The black snake and white python had long been enlightened and understood human nature. When the man in the bamboo hat greeted the man with a smile, they retreated almost at the same time. The black snake quickly spread out its long body and retreated to the edge of the stone platform on the mountain peak. The white python that had lost a wing twisted and retreated, obediently occupying the edge of the cliff. Their heads were lowered, looking docile and unusually docile. This time, they were definitely not pretending. The scales that covered the snake and the python's huge bodies trembled slightly. They did not even dare to look at the man in the bamboo hat. Alliance's bamboo knife. After the young man heard the bamboo hat man's teasing, his face filled with embarrassment. "Senior A. Liang, you must be joking." Alliance restrained his smile. Joking? The handsome young man seemed to have sensed that something was wrong. He probably thought that the bamboo hat man in front of him had a ruthless character and was about to kill him. In a hurry, he used the supernatural power of a god of mountains and rivers. His body softened and flowed like yellow mud. The mud on the ground where he stood surged. In almost the blink of an eye, the young man disappeared without a trace. The mud-like ground instantly returned to normal. In fact, the Daoist sect and the military school had similar techniques. Without the support of the body, the green bamboo knife fell. Alliance reached out to hold the bamboo knife and found that the red cotton-padded jacket girl and the other two were staring at him with their eyes wide open. Alliance quickly raised his head and puffed out his chest. He did not put the bamboo knife back into the scabbard. Instead, he leaned the tip of the knife on the ground and assumed a confident posture of looking up at the sky. The bamboo hat man secretly muttered, praise me as much as you can. The two biggest advantages of Alliance are that I like to accept criticism. If you criticize me, I will beat you to death. The second is that I can withstand other people's praise. No matter how ridiculous or mushy it is, I can accept it. Li Huai was the first to speak. The child trotted all the way to Alliance's side and sized him up. He said, Alliance, you came so late. Did you take a dump? Lazy people really shit a lot. Do you know that if you came a little later, there would be no one to accompany you in the future? Then, will you miss me then? Alliance, who had a hard time pretending to be an expert, suddenly broke down. He said angrily, I miss your mother and sister, but I don't miss a heartless brat like you. For the first time, Li Huai did not curse back. He lowered his head and his face was a little gloomy. Alliance sighed and touched the child's head. Aren't you still alive? Why are you frowning? All right. Li Huai immediately smiled and raised his head. Alliance, can you teach me peerless martial arts? Alliance asked with a smile, Can you bear hardships? The child shook his head seriously and said, Of course I can't bear hardships. You didn't teach me to not have to bear hardships and still be able to learn powerful martial arts that are invincible in the world. Alliance's mouth twitched. What do you think? Li Huai curled his lips and glanced at the bamboo hat man. Alliance, you disappoint me. Li Baoping carried a small suitcase and smiled at Alliance. Then, she ran to see Chen Pinggan. Lin Shuyi arrived in front of Alliance. He was a little puzzled, but he didn't ask anything. Alliance nodded to the youth, indicating that they should talk in private. Zhu He, who was covered in blood, sat cross-legged. He only looked frightening, but his soul and vitality had not been harmed. The man wiped the blood off his face and smiled. He felt happy, really happy. He had never been so happy in his life. It was as if all the depression in his heart had been swept away because of this great battle. His mind was clear and his muscles and bones were relaxed. Zhu Lu ran to Zhu He's side and squatted down. Her face was still covered in tears. Zhu He waved his hand and laughed. Daughter, one who survives a great disaster is bound to have good fortune in the future. This is a good thing, a very good thing. I feel as if I've grasped an opportunity to break through the realm. Several key aperture acupoints that were originally lifeless have shown signs of budding. Don't underestimate these little signs. For someone like me, whose future in martial arts was originally cut off, this is a great blessing. Zhu Lu was skeptical. She said worriedly, Father, don't be in such a hurry to talk. Be careful not to pull on your wounds. Zhu He's smile grew wider. He put his hands on his knees and his face glowed. He seemed to be in high spirits. This little injury is nothing. If I endure for another 15 minutes, I might be able to step into the threshold of the 6th realm. Of course, the premise is that I don't die in the mouth of that beast. Zhu He looked at the bamboo hat man and gave him a thumbs up. Senior Alliance, when we arrive at Red Candle Town, I'll treat you to my newly brewed apricot spring. With his back to Zhu He, Alliance raised his arm, waved his hand, and said something that spoiled the mood. Old Zhu, I can't thank you with words. Just remember it in your heart. If you say it out loud, it will seem insincere. Chen Pinggan took the small porcelain bottle handed over by Li Baoping. It was the exclusive ancestral secret recipe of the Yang family's shop. Its use was very simple, which was to endure pain. Previously in the small town's immortal tomb, after the fierce battle with Ma Kuxuan, the youth had used it once. If Alliance had not appeared in time, this small porcelain bottle would have come in handy. Now it was not necessary. Although Chen Pinggan was full of pain at the moment, it was not necessary to use it. Old Yang had once said very clearly that every medicine was 30% poisonous. If he could avoid using it, he should not use it. Especially after practicing martial arts, if he abused the so-called elixirs, in the long run, he would be digging his own corner. Li Baoping looked at her youngest martial uncle's pale face. The delicate little girl noticed that her youngest martial uncle's left hand, which was holding the hatchet, was trembling uncontrollably. Chen Pinggan softly comforted her, Don't worry. It's just that your bones have been beaten back to their original state for the time being. But it's not that there are no benefits. If my feeling is not wrong, there will be more benefits in the future. Li Baoping vigorously nodded, not doubting at all, because her youngest martial uncle had said that he would not lie to her. Alliance looked around, separately looking at the black snake and the white python. After thinking for a moment, he quietly increased the strength of the hatchet, nailing it an inch into the ground in an imperceptible manner. One of them ran back to the cave in the belly of the mountain in a daze. His head felt as if it had been struck by lightning, and blood spurted out. He was so scared that he pissed his pants. After taking a few steps away, he raised his head and looked up. There was only a small section of the green hatchet in the air, nothing else. This handsome young man, who had an elegant bearing like that of a noble family, gritted his teeth and stomped his feet. The next moment, his figure sprung out of the ground from Kadunshan shiping like bamboo shoots after the rain. He pressed one hand on his wound and looked at the unfathomable man in the bamboo hat with a long face. He wished that he could kneel down and beg for mercy. He begged bitterly, I beg the great immortal not to play with me anymore. When the young man returned, the girl Zhu Lu was subconsciously shocked. She did not know why her emotions exploded in an instant. She stood up and shouted at Alliance, "Kill them!" Alliance smiled and turned around. Looking at the girl with a ferocious face, he asked, "Why do you want to kill them?" "We have no reason, no enmity, no enmity." The girl's delicate and pretty face became more and more distorted. She stretched out her finger and pointed at the man in the bamboo hat. "No reason. Those two beasts wanted to eat us just now. This Chiduan Mountains land is the culprit behind the scenes." Alliance came to a realization. He looked at the young man whose face was full of anxiety, and then looked at the black snake and the white python respectively. "You want to eat me? You? Or you?" The Chiduan Mountains land and the two snakes that had yet to transform naturally shook their heads desperately. The girl was so angry that her whole body trembled. She cried, "My father almost died. We all almost died." Her eyes were hazy with tears as she looked at the strange man in the bamboo hat. "You clearly have the ability to get rid of evil for the people. Why don't you do it?" Two beasts. One of them used his position for private gain. Instead of protecting travelers, they worked together to harm people. "Why can't you, Alliance, kill them?" Alliance was silent for a moment. Suddenly, he laughed out loud. "Haha, you sound like my future wife." No, I actually like girls who are slightly older and have fully developed bodies." At this point, Alliance pulled out the bamboo blade from the ground and put it back into the scabbard. He made a round and plump gesture with his hands and said sneakily, "I like this kind of girl." The girl was stunned. She screamed, "You're unreasonable." Zhuhi struggled to get up. He patted his daughter on the shoulder and said in a deep voice, "Don't be rude, and don't let your emotions affect your decisions. Leave everything to Senior Alliance." Zhu Lu suddenly turned her head and looked into the distance. Her face was full of grievance and resentment. Alliance looked at Chen Pinggan. The young man nodded and said, "Alliance, you make the decision." Languid, Alliance said, "All right, then I'll have the final say. As the old saying goes, don't go too far in life so that we can meet again in the future. As people of Jianghu, we have to be more magnanimous." The young man nodded vigorously. The two mountain-like snakes on the stone platform also lowered their heads slightly. Alliance suddenly changed his tone. "But it's unreasonable if you don't compensate me for such a big fright." The young man wanted to cry but had no tears. "Great deity Alliance, the person who was really scared out of his wits is now standing opposite you." Alliance thought for a moment and put his arm around the shoulders of the Chiduan Mountains land. It was awkward that one of them was not tall, while the other was tall and slender. Fortunately, the latter was tactful and quickly bowed his head so that Alliance did not have to tiptoe to put his arm around his shoulder. Alliance pulled him and whispered to him. He kept nodding his head like a chicken pecking at rice. He did not dare to say a word. In the end, he seemed to be shocked by Alliance's simple request. At first, the young man was afraid of losing a layer of skin, but now he was pleasantly surprised and suspicious. Alliance waved his hand impatiently. "Quickly disappear before I change my mind." After that, the young man communicated with the snakes through an unorthodox technique similar to lip reading. Then he quickly escaped through the ground. The white python swayed cautiously and used its mouth to pick up the broken wing that fell on the stone platform. It tried its best to avoid the crowd and left the top of the mountain with the black snake. Before leaving, it faced the man in the bamboo hat who almost made their snake gallbladder explode in an instant. Its two huge heads slowly fell and finally touched the ground, showing its submission to Alliance. In the twilight, after a sudden thrilling battle, Zhuhi called Chen Pinggan and went to a stream near the stone platform to wash their wounds together. The girl Zhu Lu followed silently. One big and one small squatted by the stream and washed the blood on their faces and clothes. Zhuhi wanted to say something but stopped. Chen Pinggan saw the girl sitting on a stone in the stream far away. The boy said that he would go back first. Zhuhi nodded and did not ask him to stay. After Chen Pinggan left, Zhuhi stood up and came to sit beside his daughter. He softly said, "Why didn't you say sorry?" The girl took off her boots and socks, revealing her white and tender feet. After hearing her father's slightly reproachful words, the girl suddenly opened her eyes wide and said with grievance, "Father, what do you mean?" Zhu He looked into his daughter's eyes. That was a pair of beautiful eyes that greatly resembled her mother's. It caused this upright man to slightly change the harsh words that were at the tip of his tongue. He sighed and said in a gentle tone, "Earlier, Chen Pinggan stopped you from destroying the Yu character. Afterwards, it was proven that he was right." Zhu Lu hugged her knees with both hands and looked at the stream. She huffed coldly and said, "You're not his father." Of course Chen Pinggan wouldn't be worried. How could I have cared about these things at the time? What if he was wrong? Could it be that I would have just watched you die there? Zhu He didn't say anything. She turned her head, her eyes red. "Father, if I didn't do anything at the time, would I still be your daughter?" Zhu He held back some hurtful words, forcefully swallowing each and every word back into his stomach. The man originally wanted to say that as a martial artist at the peak of the second realm, you shouldn't have lost your will to fight so easily in the face of a strong enemy. However, if these words were said by someone who was a martial artist, Zhu He could say them. However, he was still her father. Thus, these words could not be said. At the very least, he could not say them now. He could only wait for a suitable opportunity in the future. However, Zhu He still felt that something was wrong in the depths of his heart. Yet, the man could not pinpoint exactly what it was. The man who had just seen a glimmer of hope on the martial path felt guilty and sad for no reason. He thought to himself that it would be great if her mother was still alive. On the mountain path leading to the stone plateau, the youth walked slowly alone. The setting sun stretched the youth's thin and weak figure very long. At the peak of the mountain, Li Baoping was tidying up her belongings in the small book box. Li Huai joined in the fun and squatted to the side. Out of the blue, he said, "Li Baoping, I'll have a small book box soon too, okay?" Li Baoping glared fiercely at him. "If you have it, then you have it. But you can't call my little martial uncle little martial uncle." Li Huai asked, "Why?" Li Baoping raised a fist with a murderous look. She narrowed her eyes and asked, "Is that enough?" Li Huai swallowed his saliva and muttered, "Little martial uncle is nothing. I don't care about it. I've dropped a rank for nothing." Li Huai patted his butt and stood up. After walking far away, he turned his head and smiled. "Li Baoping, if in the future you want to call me Chen Pinggan, brother, what will you do?" "What should you call me?" Li Baoping chuckled. After standing up, she twisted her wrist. Li Huai panicked. "Li Baoping, can you always reason with your fists? Can't we talk nicely? We are scholars, and scholars should." Without waiting for Li Huai to finish, Li Baoping quickly stepped forward and was about to beat Li Huai. Li Huai was quick-witted. He braced himself and didn't step back. He said earnestly, "Li Baoping, aren't you afraid that your little martial uncle will think that you are an unreasonable young lady? When the time comes and he doesn't like you anymore, who will you cry to? Don't blame me for not reminding you. This is called don't say I didn't warn you." Li Baoping stopped and frowned. Li Huai patted his chest and said, "Don't worry. Among the three of us, Chen Pinggan likes you the most. As long as you don't become like that Zhu Lu in the future, it'll be fine." Li Baoping smiled and returned to her original position. She squatted down and continued to pack the small suitcase. Li Huai swaggered away, his face full of pride. The hermit has a brilliant plan to rule the country and bring peace to the world. In the future, I won't have to be afraid of Li Baoping. Li Huai was very happy. He couldn't help but want to have fun with his Alliance brothers. He roared, "Alliance! Alliance, come out!" The child looked over and saw Alliance and Lin Shuyi together. Li Huai was about to run over, but he suddenly stopped. That was because the stone plateau cliff was where the white python had appeared. Li Huai was scared. He hesitated for a moment, but still turned around and squatted beside Li Baoping. He then looked for Chen Pinggan's figure. Li Huai was in a daze when he thought of that guy's figure that had resolutely pounced on the white python. This mischievous child subconsciously felt that Li Baoping's martial uncle was quite reliable. At least, he was much better than that Zhu Lu. On the cliff's edge, Alliance and the young Lin Shuyi sat and looked at the mountains and rivers in the distance. Lin Shuyi raised his head and drank a mouthful of strong wine. He then handed the wine gourd back to Alliance. Lin Shuyi sat upright. Compared to Alliance's crooked posture, Lin Shuyi was very different. The youth asked softly, "Alliance, is the wine in this gourd not simple?" Alliance grunted. Lin Shuyi asked curiously, "How is it not simple?" "I only know that after drinking the wine, my body has become much better." Alliance shook the small wine gourd and said, just by deliberately shaking it to release a little bit of the wine smell, it was able to scare away those monsters that had taken human form on Iron Talisman River. "Don't you think it's amazing? Of course, no matter how good your nose is, you can only smell the wine when you pull out the cork like you normally do." Lin Shuyi became more and more curious. He asked, "Then why did you let go of the mountain's earth and the two pythons?" Alliance adjusted his bamboo hat and said with a smile, "The mountain's earth has a protective talisman. It's not hard to kill them, but it will be very troublesome afterwards. And right now, what I'm most afraid of is trouble. Besides, they have a great enmity with you, but they have no enmity with me, Alliance. Right now, you don't have anything missing, and Juhi has even received great benefits. Why do you still want to kill them?" Alliance paused for a moment. "Some people are missing something, but I don't think they care too much. It can't be helped. This guy's way of calculating gains and losses is different from others." Lin Shuyi said, "You're talking about Chen Pinggan, right? His injuries are clearly more serious than Zhu his, but he hides it better." Alliance did not comment on this. Lin Shuyi said to himself that Zhu Lu was impatient to save her father. Of course, she wasn't wrong, but her mistake was. Alliance waved his hand, interrupting the youth's conclusion. He said with a smile, "Don't talk about people behind their backs. Justice is in people's hearts." Lin Shuyi grunted and did not say anything else. A cool breeze brushed past his face. Alliance leisurely drank his wine, slowly saying, "Lin Shuyi, you're very smart. You're the first smart person to realize that I'm worth befriending. Don't be in such a hurry. I don't mean to belittle you. On the path of cultivation, some people have the root of wisdom, like Li Baoping. Some people have the fate of fortune, like Li Huai. Some people have the ability to comprehend, like you. All of them are good things. Qi Jingchuan's insight has always been very good. Otherwise." Lin Shuyi's ears perked up. Alliance grinned. "He knows a friend like me." Lin Shuyi smiled knowingly. This man never gave up on the chance to flatter himself. He had long since gotten used to it. However, this mature youth was becoming more and more certain of one thing. That was Alliance's boasting. It sounded very far-fetched, but that was because, including himself, no one really knew how powerful this guy was. To wine and songs, how long is life? Like morning dew, the passing of days is bitter. Alliance fiercely gulped down a mouthful of wine, raising his head to look at the darkening sky. He softly said, "And that indigo collar, lingering in my heart. How can there be such moving words in this world?" Alliance shook his head, dispersing that bit of melancholy. He laughed self-deprecatingly and pointed at the continuous mountain range. "In the eyes of some people, the human world is like an upside-down galaxy." Lin Shuyi asked a very profound question. "Alliance, among some people, are you one of them?" Alliance shook his head. "Not for the time being. I don't like to be that kind of person." Alliance softly exhaled, no longer drinking. He propped up his cheek with one hand and tilted his head to look into the distance. In the past, there was a stubborn old man who had students all over the world. Among his favorite disciples, Qi Jingchuan's calligraphy was the best, Kui Dong's chess skills were the best, and there was also one person whose sword skills were the best. Lin Shuyi held back his laughter and turned to look at the bamboo hat man's profile. The disciple whose sword skills were the best, was he called Alliance? Alliance laughed loudly. "Of course that person wasn't me. How could it be me?" Lin Shuyi, who did not get the answer right, was somewhat stunned. He only heard that guy say with a smile, "But that person's sword skills were taught by me." Although the youth was shocked to the extreme, he still believed this without a doubt. Alliance turned his head and asked, If I said that Qi Jingchuan's calligraphy was also taught by me, would you believe me? The youth, who was sitting upright and still, did not hesitate and said decisively, I wouldn't believe it even if you beat me to death. Alliance patted the youth's shoulder and said earnestly, Lin Shuyi, you're really smart. So tomorrow you won't have any wine to drink. The youth, who had always been old-fashioned and indifferent, grinned, but it was still implicit and silent. Alliance said with emotion, heaven and earth, all things go against the flow. When a scholar speaks, there is knowledge in his words. Lin Shuyi suddenly asked an inexplicable question. Alliance, did Chen Pinggan disappoint you? The bamboo hat man's expression was as usual. Let's wait and see. Late at night, Chen Pinggan and Zhu He were in charge of taking turns to keep watch by the bonfire as usual. The youth was weaving straw sandals at the same time. For some reason, Zhu He got up and came to the youth's side. Chen Pinggan was a little surprised. Zhu He reached out to warm himself by the fire. The light of the fire shone on the man's rough face. The man turned his head and asked with a smile, you should have found that qi, right? The qi is like a swimming dragon, and it keeps sinking and roaming around, right? Chen Pinggan nodded and sat up straight. This was what he was most confused about. Zhu He did not hide or keep him in suspense. He slowly explained, this means that you have entered the mud embryo stage. Don't underestimate this first hurdle. Whether you can practice martial arts or not depends on whether you can produce it, find it, and control this qi. As the saying goes, man strives for a breath, Buddha receives a stick of incense. That's pretty much what it means. Your body is still a clay bodhisattva, but as long as you have this qi, you can be considered to have reached a higher level. After that, there is hope. No matter how good the scenery at the peak of martial arts is, without this crucial step, it is all empty talk. Zhu He sized up the youth and praised, your body has been tempered well. Yes, it should be pretty good. You don't lose to those rich kids who grew up soaking in medicine. I don't know what you have experienced, but I can roughly confirm that you are now in the second stage of martial arts after the mud embryo stage, the wood embryo stage. Although it doesn't make much sense as to why you haven't truly found the Qi Fu acupuncture point to rest and cultivate, your body and meridians do indeed belong to the second stage. It's just that you are far from the completion of the second stage. Chen Pinggan held his breath and concentrated, seriously listening to the martial arts that were hard to buy with money. The man who was praised as a wise teacher by the ancestor of the Li family continued, the wood embryo stage is very interesting. The level of achievement does not depend on talent or bone structure. There is only one word to describe it, suffering. Previously, Alliance explained the Dali post house to you, right? Chen Pinggan nodded and asked, does this have anything to do with martial arts? Zhu He added a handful of firewood to the ravine and tried his best to explain the obscure and difficult to practice martial arts in simple terms. He smiled and said, the meridians in our human body are actually like a post office road. If you want carriages and horses to pass through, you can only open the road bit by bit and build a bridge when you meet a river. Some people are lazy and can't bear the hardships, so they cultivate a narrow path and build a single plank bridge. In fact, they can still walk and continue to walk on the path of martial arts. However, the further they go, the greater the limitations. It's a very simple reason. When experts call for reinforcements, it's like a war between two countries. It depends on whose troops and horses are faster. Even if you have thousands of troops and horses, the road is narrow and difficult to pass through. Chen Pinggan was suddenly enlightened. That's the principle. That's why this stage is also called the mountain opening stage. It is a test of one's patience and patience. To practice martial arts, one must put in all their effort and work hard. This is why the arrogant Qi refinement warriors view the work of inferior people. This is because martial artists cannot afford the slightest bit of slacking off at this stage. They are similar to farmers. If they want to harvest, they can only bury their heads in hard work. Chen Pinggan smiled and said, I can bear hardships. I'm not that much worse than others. Zhu He was speechless. He thought, if you, Chen Pinggan, are not bad, then where am I, Zhu He, supposed to stand? Zhu He's expression turned solemn. However, you must remember that at this stage, Being diligent is a good thing, but you can't stay there for too long. Why do Taoists advocate returning to one's natural state? It's because one's innate qi will gradually dissipate as one grows older. Or it will be mixed up by the filthy qi of heaven and earth, evil qi, and many other impurities, causing it to become extremely turbid. This is just like how scholars like to drink tea. When they plant tea trees, the most taboo is the growth of impurities. This is the principle. Generally speaking, before the age of 16, or at most, before the age of 18, one should attempt to break through to the third stage, the Mercury Silver stage. This will allow one's qi and blood to become more vigorous and dense like Mercury. At the same time, one's body will become lighter, and at the same time, one's bones will become tougher. A person's qi and blood is like the soldiers under the command of a general on the battlefield. One needs an army of tigers and wolves, and not those grassroots, embroidered pillows. Do you understand what I'm saying? The youth wearing straw sandals lowered his head again to look at the straw sandals he was weaving in his hands. He blushed and said, "I understand." Zhu He could not help but laugh. He said in a low voice, "Mastery of the second stage will allow the texture of your skin to be refined, just like the magical treasures of qi cultivators. After they are inscribed with talismans and meridians are developed, the path of martial arts will become wider and wider. As for the peak of the third stage, the Mercury Silver stage, it is extremely important. You need to pass through a tribulation. The martial arts manuals often call it clay bodhisattva crossing the river. The specific details are extremely mysterious, so I'm not in a position to say too much. Everyone has their own fate." Chen Pinggan memorized every single word without missing a single word. Zhu He said in a low voice, "The first 3 stages are about refining the body, which is relatively practical. The last 3 stages are more superficial. They are the 3 matters of the soul, spirit, and guts, which need to be progressed step by step." After that, Zhu He sank into deep thoughts. He had benefited a lot from today's battle. Zhu He needed to settle down those thoughts that had suddenly appeared. Chen Pinggan did not dare to disturb him. He began to digest Zhu He's priceless advice that was easy to understand. Zhu He only regained his senses after a long time. He smiled and said, "The 3 stages of qi refinement emphasize on a natural process. As long as you walk to that stage, you will naturally understand. It is very difficult for outsiders to give you pointers. Moreover, the real pointers are never about the principles. Only when you have truly walked to the door by yourself, will the bystanders from afar be able to explain the reason to you. Qi refinement for martial artists and qi cultivators who are proficient in both cultivation and cultivation are almost diametrically opposite. You will understand in the future." In the end, Zhu He said in high spirits, "Although there are suspicions of spoiling things through excessive enthusiasm, I still can't help but want to tell you about the legendary peak scenery of the last 3 stages of martial artists. Otherwise, when you meet qi cultivators in the future, you won't know how to refute them. The 7th stage of spirit refinement, golden body, is a true master expert. The outstanding ones in this stage can even cultivate the so-called invincible body of Vajra of Buddhism or the so-called stainless glass of Taoism, the body of a golden immortal. There are even some methods that can allow martial artists to strengthen their own body through 3 methods of ordering, hiring, and praying, making it indestructible. The 8th stage, ascendant realm. Martial artists are already able to hover in the air and fly with the wind. Therefore, it is also known as the far travel realm. Far travel realm. Who said that we martial artists are uncouth? I feel that the term far travel is very interesting. The last stage is the 9th stage, peak realm. If the 2 of us are at the highest point of this Chesdun mountain, we will be at the top of the mountain and look down on the other mountains. Martial artists of this stage are also known as the end realm master. It is used to describe the martial path under one's feet. They have already reached the end. At this point, Zhu He simply stood up and walked slowly around the bonfire. With an agitated expression, he clenched his fists and said in a clear voice, "Although it is not as exaggerated as moving mountains and overturning seas, it is still able to break city walls with a punch and split a river with a palm. The vigorous aura around one's body is invulnerable to all evils and repels thousands of soldiers. The body is extremely strong and tyrannical, even surpassing the body of a Buddhist arhat. Once a chi refinement warrior is within 100 feet of one's body, unless one has a superior grade protective Dharma treasure or better, one will definitely die. His eyes were burning and filled with passion. He lowered his head and stared at the young man. Think about it. Once you reach the end realm, you will be able to see thousands of miles of mountains and rivers under your feet. You will look down on immortals and belittle kings. This is how a real man should be. Chen Pinggan was a little embarrassed. For a moment, he did not know how to answer. This was because the young man's mind was filled with thoughts of practicing more stake-walking and sword cauldron in the future. Perhaps, he might be able to reach the third realm in this lifetime. How could he think so far ahead? After all, he already felt that it was very difficult to promise Miss Ning that he would punch 1,000,000 times. When Zhu He left, his emotions were still surging. He left behind a young man who continued to weave straw sandals. At dawn, when Alliance woke up with a yawn, he saw the young man standing at the edge of the cliff. He was still doing that boring 6-step stake walking, facing the mountain wind and sweating profusely. A figure rushed past Alliance and stood beside the young man very quickly. She accompanied her little martial uncle and practiced boxing together. Alliance drank a mouthful of wine. After putting away the small gourd, he eagerly ran over to join in the fun. Soon, the little girl's lecturing voice sounded beside him. Alliance, your posture is wrong. Sai, your arm is crooked this time. Alliance, your steps are a little too big. Take it back. Really, I'm not lying to you. If you don't believe me, look at my little martial uncle. He's so steady. Alliance, if you continue to be so absent-minded, I'm really going to get angry. The man in the bamboo hat finally felt aggrieved. He could not help but complain, Baoping, did you not realize that I'm the real peerless swordsman in that soul-stirring battle yesterday? The little girl in the red cotton-padded jacket nodded seriously as she practiced the 6-step stake walking. I know, but you're really not that good at boxing. Mr. Chi said that every profession has its own specialization. Alliance, you don't have to feel embarrassed. Take it slow. I promise I won't scold you. Alliance strode away and shouted in a fit of pique, I'm not practicing anymore. I'm not practicing anymore. Alliance suddenly turned around and saw the little girl's sly and cute gaze. Alliance made a big face at her. The little girl ignored him. The corner of the young man's mouth curled up. Alliance looked at the young man and the little girl practicing boxing from afar. He was a little happy and also smiled. The mountain wind was warm and the sun was rising from the east. 101. When they were about to set off after breakfast, Alliance, who was leading the donkey, suddenly asked everyone to wait for a moment. Then he shouted, Come out. The young and handsome man of the Chiduan mountain, who was dressed in a fluttering white robe with large sleeves, soon came out of the stone plateau at the top of the mountain. With a long wooden box in his hand, he bent down and said to the man in the bamboo hat with a flattering face, Great Immortal, I've already prepared a carriage. The remaining 200 miles of mountain road will be as smooth as flat ground. Alliance was like a completely different person from the guy who had defeated the enemy with one strike yesterday. He said amiably, Thank you for your hard work. Please take the things first. You can pass them to me when we are about to leave the territory of Chiduan Mountain. The young earthling was flattered. Great Immortal is too polite. I don't deserve it. Alliance took a step forward, patted the shoulder of this god, and handed the white donkey's reins to him. Then I won't stand on ceremony with you. You can also take the horse to the border. The young 2DI said righteously, It's my duty. It's my honor to serve as the Great Immortal's lackey. Alliance turned to look at Li Huai. When they were eating, this little brat had cried, made a fuss, and threatened to hang himself in order to snatch a piece of spiced beef from him. He had done everything he could, including selling his mother and sister. If Alliance was willing to accept him, this little brat might even sell his father to him. Of course, Alliance was not soft-hearted. In the end, Li Huai was so angry that he wanted to have a duel with Alliance. Until now, the relationship between the two of them was still hostile. Alliance stuck out his thumb and pointed at the flattering young man behind him. His meaning was, "Did you see that, kid? I, Alliance, am very popular in the Jianghu, so show me some respect in the future." Li Huai rolled his eyes, turned his head and spat on the ground. Alliance snapped, "Let's go, let's go." Moments after he finished speaking, 3 tortoises with carapaces as big as a round table climbed to the top of the mountain. Their carapaces were bright red, like large balls of flame. When the young local god with the green bamboo stick looked at them, the mountain tortoises shrank their necks at the same time. Everything had its vanquisher. As the nominal king of the Chiduan mountain, the young local god had been unable to deal with the 2 pythons for hundreds of years due to the constraints of his cultivation. However, the rest of the birds and beasts that had yet to mature were no different from cattle, sheep, chickens, and dogs in the market before him. Each tortoise's carapace could accommodate 3 people. The young local god was very meticulous. He nailed a circle of low railings around the edge of the carapace. The railings were made of sturdy hardwood taken from the ground. They acted as handrails to prevent the distinguished guests from falling from the bumpy ride. Li Baoping, Li Huai, and Lin Shuyi climbed up the carapace one after another. Chen Pinggan was called by Li Baoping to the tortoise carapace she had chosen. Alliance accompanied Li Huai, Lin Shuyi, Zhu He, and Zhu Lu. The father and daughter pair had their own quiet place. Li Huai was overjoyed. When the mountain tortoises moved, the child's body only swayed slightly. It was not bumpy at all. It was actually much more comfortable than an ox carriage. Although it looked clumsy, the speed of the mountain tortoises going down the mountain was not slow. Li Huai was overjoyed. He hammered Alliance's knee with all his strength. "My dear mother, it's the first time in my life that I'm sitting on such a big tortoise's back. Alliance, you wicked brat, you finally did a good deed." Alliance looked at Li Huai with a pitiful expression. "For you to be able to grow up to this age, it seems that the customs of this small town are very simple." Li Huai turned his head to look at Lin Shuyi. "Did Alliance say something bad about me?" Lin Shuyi was resting with his eyes closed, as if he was silently feeling the gentle mountain breeze of late spring. He turned a deaf ear to Li Huai's question. Li Huai looked at Alliance sneakily, trying to find clues from the bamboo hat man's expression. Alliance said with a straight face, "It's good words." Li Huai glanced at the green scabbard saber on Alliance's leg and then at the small silver calabash at his waist. He asked, "Alliance, can you let me play with your bamboo blade?" Alliance shook his head. "You're not suited to using a saber." Li Huai frowned. "Then what kind of weapon is suitable for me?" Alliance's expression was serious. "You can reason with others. Convince them with reason and virtue." Li Huai sighed and said dejectedly, "I can't." Alliance, who was originally teasing the child, was truly puzzled. "Why?" Li Huai raised his head and looked elsewhere. The lush green trees and the occasional brilliant spring flowers flashed and disappeared. The child said softly, "My voice is too small. My mother said that whoever has the loudest voice in an argument is the one who is right. But at home, my father doesn't like to talk. You can't beat him with a stick, and my sister is also coy and soft-tempered. She's very taciturn. So when something happens at home, as long as my mother isn't around, my father and sister can only stare at each other. It can make people anxious. In fact, I don't like to argue with others. But sometimes, when I sit on the wall and watch my mother argue with others, I'm afraid that one day my mother will be old and can't argue anymore. What should I do? Our family is poor. We don't even have the money to fix a hole in the house. My father is useless. When my sister grows up, she is destined to marry. When the time comes, if we don't even have someone to argue with, won't our family be bullied to death by outsiders?" Lin Shuyi's mind moved slightly. Alliance joked, "TSK, TSK. How old are you? Thinking so far ahead?" The child said helplessly, "There's no other way. My mother always said that I'm the only one in the family with a handle. Mr. Chi taught us that people who don't think far ahead will have immediate worries. So I have to do that for Wei Yu." Alliance smiled and helped to say the 2 words, "Prepare." Li Huai shook his head. "Lin Shuyi, what did Mr. Chi say a gentleman should do?" Lin Shuyi opened his eyes and said slowly, "Hide weapons in your body and wait for the right time to move." Li Huai pointed at Alliance. "Alliance, you're just fooling around." Lin Shuyi kind of wanted to sit next to Chen Pinggan and Li Baoping. At least his ears would be quiet. Ah Liang took off his wine gourd and drank a mouthful of wine. He chuckled and said, "As for me, I had an agreement with the Earth Lord of Chiduan Mountain yesterday. When we parted, as compensation, he and those two evil creatures would take out a parting gift. You saw that long wooden box earlier, right? It's called the Heng Bao Ji in the Jianghu. It's similar to a 100 treasure rack that was erected, and it's filled with valuable treasures. Originally, I had agreed to give each of you a gift. Of course, you, Li Huai, were no exception." Li Huai was unmoved. He just said methodically, "Alliance, I know you have 100 big boats in your stomach." Ah Liang was stunned. "What nonsense are you talking about?" Lin Shuyi said casually, "The Prime Minister's stomach is big enough to support a boat." Alliance slapped Li Huai's head and laughed heartily. The mountain tortoises chose secluded mountain paths to traverse through mountains and rivers. They were relaxed and comfortable, making the group leisurely. When they arrived at some beautiful places, Alliance let Chen Pinggan rest for a while. During this time, Chen Pinggan passed by a small bamboo forest with bamboo poles that were as green as jade. He used the remaining half of his hatchet to chop down 2 bamboos. He divided them into bamboo tubes of different lengths and put them into the basket on his back. Li Huai knew the reason. He was so happy that he jumped around, shouting that he wanted to carry the book box. The 3 mountain tortoises lay in the distance, watching the straw sandals youth chop down the bamboos. Their fist-sized yellow eyes were full of admiration. Alliance drank wine on the side and looked at the busy youth. He said cheerfully, "You have good taste, but unfortunately, you still don't have the luck." Before they set off, the red cotton-padded jacket girl asked Zhuhi that she wanted to sit alone with Zhu Lu. Zhuhi naturally did not refuse. He only told his daughter to take good care of the young lady. Zhu Lu nodded. Zhuhi then went to sit on the same tortoise shell as Chen Pinggan. The youth chopped the green bamboo tubes into bamboo slices and strips. Now that they lacked hemp rope, the bamboo box could only be formed after they reached Red Candle Town at the earliest. Zhuhi picked up a piece of bamboo and found that it was very light but quite tough. Thinking of the green bamboo stick in the hands of the young local lord of Chiduan Mountain, he suddenly understood that the bamboo forest, which was only 1 or 2 acres in size, was definitely not ordinary bamboo. Perhaps it was one of the spring areas where the spiritual aura of Chiduan Mountain gathered. Zhuhi liked his young lady from the bottom of his heart. He could not help but remind her, "These bamboos have a great background. If it was an ordinary hatchet, it would have long been chipped or bent. Therefore, after these 2 book boxes are completed, my young lady may be depressed because in the end, her small bamboo box is the most ordinary." Chen Pinggan was stunned. He turned his head to look at the mountain tortoises carrying Alliance and the other 2 people behind him and asked tentatively, "Is that bamboo forest related to the land of Chiduan Mountain?" Alliance nodded and said, "It can be considered his old foundation. After absorbing the spiritual aura of the mountain, it can only produce this kind of green color in 100 years. After another 400 or 500 years, there is hope to condense a little bit of green wood essence. But it's okay. The 2 bamboos you cut are only 200 years old. It's not enough to make that guy bleed. At most, he will feel a little pain. It's nothing." Chen Pinggan sighed and dispelled the idea of going back to chop down another green bamboo. Alliance asked, "What's wrong? You think 2 are too few? Do you want me to help you pick a few better bamboos?" Chen Pinggan shook his head and said, "Forget it." Zhuhi asked curiously, "It's not troublesome to go back and forth. It's less than an hour." Chen Pinggan looked at the basket by his feet. It was packed with bamboo pieces and bamboo strips. There was still quite a lot of space. However, the teenager still shook his head and said, "It's more important to hurry." Zhuhi did not take it to heart. He smiled and said, "In the path of martial arts, the emphasis is on the word sharpening. If you don't spar with others and have no one to feed you, you won't be able to achieve great results. Therefore, when you have time, let's spar." I'll say the ugly words first. Although it's called a spa, other than guaranteeing that I won't hurt you, I won't be careless in my attacks. Therefore, you should be mentally prepared for a bloody nose and a swollen face. Chen Pingan's face was filled with surprise. He grinned and said, Uncle Zhu, just hit me with all your might. Before noon, the tortoise had already traveled half of the mountain path. Everyone was beside a pool under a waterfall. They had a clear division of labor and were familiar with cooking. Chen Pingan told the little girl about the small bamboo box. After hearing the reason he secretly told her, the little girl smiled from ear to ear. In the end, her face was filled with pride. She patted the small bamboo box that was always by her side and told her martial uncle that the best book box in the world was here. She even gave it a nickname, Green Clothes. After eating, Alliance called Chen Pingan to the dark green pool. The waterfall was not large, so the cold air was not heavy. The two walked side by side. Alliance hesitated for a moment and asked, according to what you said before, you now have Luopa Mountain, Treasure Book Mountain, Iridescent Clouds Peak, Immortal Grass Mountain, and Junju Mountain in the West Mountains of Longquan County. There are a total of 5 mountains, big and small? Chen Pingan nodded doubtfully. He did not hide anything and slowly said, Luopa Mountain is the most valuable among them. Treasure Book Mountain is also not bad. The other 3 are very ordinary, especially Junju Mountain. It is just an inconspicuous hill. Alliance patted the hilt of his saber gently. After thinking for a moment, he said, the real value of these mountains now lies in the accumulation of spiritual energy, which is far better than the outside world. So on our way here, not only are the 5 transformed monsters trying to enter your hometown along the Iron Talisman River, but there are also many mandrill demons who have just been enlightened. They are rushing over there. But in the end, who will be lucky enough to successfully occupy a corner, will depend on their own fate and whether they have the chance of great Tao. Alliance drank a mouthful of wine and continued, don't think that just because there are demons entering the mountain, there will be thieves at home. Just like this Chestun Mountain, which has an extraordinary momentum, why did the land allow the 2 pythons to grow bit by bit under his nose? The reason is very simple. After he was stripped of his orthodox identity, if the Chestun Mountain wanted to retain its spiritual energy, someone had to stand up and help him guard the mountain, suppress the evil spirits, and absorb fate. Chen Pingan asked, Alliance, do you mean that I should invite the land of the Chestun Mountain or the 2 pythons to my mountain? It's a bit like helping me guard my house. Alliance squatted down, picked up a stone at random, and threw it into the pool. He shook his head with a smile. You are only half right. Awarding the righteous gods of mountains and rivers is the most important thing of the Dali Imperial Court recently. It involves the fate of the dynasty, so outsiders are not allowed to meddle in it. So, which of the mountains in your hometown can have a mountain god recognized by the Imperial Court? They must be some dead people, or to be precise, heroic spirits appointed by Emperor Dali. If the land of the Chestun Mountain goes to your mountain, it will not be legitimate. What is going on? Besides, even if your Luopa Mountain or Baolu Mountain is lucky enough to have a mountain god conferred by the Imperial Court settle down, build a mountain god temple, erect a clay statue, and be qualified to enjoy the incense. However, the land here has not been strictly examined by Kintianjian, so it is impossible for him to be the mountain god of Luopa Mountain. Only if he stays in the Chestun Mountain, there may be some hope. After all, in the past few hundred years, even if he has not made any contributions, he has worked hard and did not cause any trouble. Maybe Emperor Dali will give him a way out and promote him to a mountain god while upgrading the Chestun Mountain. So, even if you ask him to go, he will not agree. The matter of the incense god position to these gods of mountains and rivers is a matter of life and death to the mortals. It is even more important, because once you take this step, there is no turning back. Chen Pingan squatted beside Alliance and asked tentatively, do you want me to rope in those 2 pythons? Alliance threw a stone and said with a smile, it is a little difficult to choose. Although those 2 beasts are not of bad origin, they have done a lot of evil over the years. If word gets out, their reputation will be bad. Chen Pingan asked, if I allow them to go to Luopa Mountain or Baolu Mountain, can they guarantee that they will not eat people? Alliance was stunned. He rubbed his chin and said, "Eat people? Under normal circumstances, with such abundant spiritual energy, it is too late to cultivate. However, pythons belong to the flood dragon family after all. They are cold-blooded by nature. Occasionally, when they are full, they will eat people to try something new. For example, if you are unlucky, it is hard to say if you encounter them coming out of the cave to look for food." Chen Pingan asked again, "Then can you tell them from the beginning that they can cultivate on my mountain, but they are not allowed to eat people?" "Alliance, is this okay?" The man in the bamboo hat asked back, "Aren't you afraid that they will agree verbally, but when they go back to the mountain and see someone, they will bite that person's life? Anyway, you will not be on the mountain recently." Chen Pingan was in high spirits. He said slowly, "Alliance, didn't you say that there is a courier station in Red Candle Town? The courier station can send letters. I can write a letter to Master Wan and rent the 3 mountains, including Baolu Mountain, to him for 50 years. If Master Wan thinks it is too little, I can add another 50 years. Then, I will ask Master Wan to help me keep an eye on those 2 beasts. If they dare to hurt people, I will kill them with 1 punch, so that they will not stay on Chestun Mountain to harm people. Of course, this is the worst-case scenario. When the time comes, I will ask the Black Snake, who has the potential to become an inky flood dragon, to stay on Luopa Mountain and help me accumulate wealth year after year. Alliance, you said that if a snake or python successfully transforms into a dragon by walking on the river, then the place where it first originated from will also receive great fortune, right? I can even be thick-skinned and beg Master Wan to agree to let it stay on Baolu Mountain. Think about it, if even the white python can walk on the river, then I will make a lot of money. It just so happens that after I bought the mountain, I have been worried about it. If the black snake and the white python stay on the mountain, I will feel that these mountains are not bought in vain. Every day, I will feel like there are a lot of copper coins falling into my pocket. Hualala. Alliance looked at the teenager who was talking non-stop with a dull face. He did not know whether to laugh or cry. With complicated feelings, he asked, "Chen Pingan, do you like to make money so much?" Chen Pingan's face was full of shock. He asked back, "Is there anyone in the world who doesn't like to make money?" Alliance adjusted his bamboo hat. He did not want to speak, so as to avoid playing the lute to a cow. The man sighed and said with a smile, "I originally thought that you would righteously refuse." Chen Pingan was confused. "Why do you think so?" Alliance washed his face with water. He turned his head and said with a smile, "For example, I will say that it is too late to kill those 2 evil beasts. Although I, Chen Pingan, am poor, my old Chen family's values are very upright. How could I be willing to let them into my house?" I was already prepared to be scolded. Chen Pingan's expression calmed down. He picked up a stone and gently threw it into the pool. After a moment of silence, he suddenly turned his head and patted Alliance's shoulder. "Alliance, you are still too young." The man in the bamboo hat raised his eyebrows. "Oh, it seems that you are in a good mood. You even know how to joke." Chen Pingan also imitated the man and raised his eyebrows. He actually gave people the feeling that he was quite cheap. Alliance laughed and stood up. Chen Pingan also stood up. He suddenly thought of something and asked worriedly, "Alliance, the key is, are those 2 snakes really willing to move their nest?" Alliance laughed but did not speak. Chen Pingan looked at the man in the bamboo hat and put his palm on the hilt of his saber. Alliance patted the hilt of his saber and said jokingly, "So you should also hurry up and practice martial arts. You can learn swordsmanship in the future because you are willing to be reasonable. When others are not, you will need to use this." Chen Pingan did not comment. The 2 walked back to their original place. Alliance asked curiously, "Why didn't you chop a few more bamboos before? This is such a good thing. If you miss this village, you won't be able to buy it in the future even if you have the money." Chen Pingan casually replied, "Someone once said that people should be content with what they have and stop when they are ahead." Alliance did not know whether to laugh or cry. "You really listened to that nonsense." Chen Pingan held the back of his head with both hands. It was rare for him to be so lazy and relaxed. His head shook like the bamboo in the forest swaying in the breeze. The youth said softly, because I have never heard any great principles since I was young. So when I heard one or two sentences, it was difficult to forget. Zhuhi suddenly shouted from afar, Chen Pinggan, let's find an open space to spar. The youth took to his heels and ran away. All right. 102. Once the bamboos gathered together, as long as they did not suffer too many natural and man-made disasters, they could easily become a sea of bamboos. However, this unknown small bamboo forest on the Chiduan mountain had been growing slowly for thousands of years. Even though generations of mountain lords and the land had carefully taken care of it, it still could not usher in a bumper harvest. At this time, the young and beautiful lord of the land of the Chiduan mountain inserted the green bamboo stick into the ground beside his feet and squatted beside the two chopped green bamboos. He wanted to cry but had no tears. In a sad and trembling voice, he said, "You can't bully people like this. No matter how big a guest is, he is still a guest. How can you bully the host like this? You broke the formation with a knife and revealed this treasured land. What's the difference between this and you coming to the host's house as a guest and stripping off the clothes of the host's daughter when you see her slender and beautiful appearance? What's the difference?" The black snake and the white python, born from the earth spirit and the cloud root of the Chiduan mountain, were entrenched in the periphery of the bamboo forest. In their gloomy eyes, there was some human-like gloating. A voice sounded not far away and teased, "Then your family has too many daughters. In the future, your dowry will be a huge loss." The young man stood up abruptly and bowed. The young man stood up in horror, without the slightest bit of grief, bitterness, and resentment on his face. He bowed and apologized to the man wearing the bamboo hat. "Great immortal, I've made a fool of myself. This humble one is used to living a poor life in this small piece of land, so my eyesight is shallow. I can't compare with the great immortal who has traveled the world and seen the mountains and rivers. With the great immortal's eyesight, you must be able to see that this bamboo forest is really a pitiful family property for this humble one. Therefore, even if it's only 2 bamboos missing, it's still difficult for me to restrain my emotions." Alliance, who had left and returned, leaned against a green bamboo and looked up at the lush bamboo leaves. He withdrew his gaze and asked, "Was the earliest ancestor of this bamboo forest transplanted from the bamboo sea cave? And then you made it into this green bamboo stick. Because of this, you angered a certain immortal. In a fit of anger, he removed your golden body deity position that was originally the land of the Chestun mountain?" This time, the young landowner was really shocked. The flattery and fawning expression on his face was not strong but rather weak. He quietly straightened his back, bowed in a dignified manner, and said, "Wei Pai, the landowner of Chiduan Mountain, was conferred the title of mountain deity by the last emperor of Holy Water Country of the previous dynasty. I was in charge of the territory of thousands of miles around Chiduan Mountain. Later, when the dynasty changed, the Song clan rose up and annexed Holy Water Country. Because of something that angered the founding emperor of the Song clan, I was demoted from the position of mountain deity to the position of mountain deity." He raised the green bamboo stick that was full of spiritual aura in his hand and said with a wry smile, "Blessings do not come in pairs and misfortunes do not come alone. In that storm, I was forced to cut down the green bamboo from the bamboo sea cave to make this mountain stick. Unexpectedly, not long after, I angered the immortal friend of the person who planted the bamboo. As they chatted and laughed, I, a small landowner from the soil, was beaten back into the soil again." Alliance leaned against the green bamboo and changed into a posture that he thought was more elegant. He clicked his tongue and said, "It sounds a little tragic." The young landowner was resentful. Ignoring the lord of the land who had a tragic life, Alliance turned his head to look outside the bamboo forest. In his field of vision, Chen Pinggan, who had returned with him, was standing on the hillside. The snakes and pythons sensibly stayed away from him, especially the white python that still had lingering fears. Alliance said with a smile, "My friend wants to discuss a business with you. You can discuss the price yourselves. If you agree, you will be friends. If you don't agree, it doesn't matter. If the business fails, we will still be friends." At this point, Alliance smiled and held the bamboo blade at his waist. Alliance withdrew his gaze from the bodies of the 2 behemoths and asked curiously, Those two beasts are not real flood dragons after all, especially the black snake. How did it become the prototype of the inky flood dragon and grow four-toed dragon claws? Did they have a fortuitous encounter? The young landowner who called himself Wei Pai carefully replied, "They did have a fortuitous encounter, but I don't know the specific reason. I only guess that it has something to do with the Lizhu cave. They must have accidentally swallowed something strange, and this thing must be of great benefit to snakes, pythons, and carps." The Red Candle Town near the border of the Chiduan Mountain is a place where the waterways connect to the confluence of three rivers. One of them is called the Chongdan River. Now, there is a carp that has grown 2 strands of genuine golden dragon whiskers, which makes people envious. 100 years ago, this carp once went against the flow of rivers, streams, and mountain springs all the way to the Chiduan Mountain. I have seen it with my own eyes. Logically speaking, even if it is given another 400 or 500 years, it will never be able to grow such amazing dragon whiskers. Alliance nodded and suddenly said, "If that's the case, then I have a little idea." The young landowner glanced at the waist knife of the man in the bamboo hat and asked tentatively, "How did the great immortal know the origin of this green bamboo stick?" Alliance's expression was strange. He laughed and said evasively, "When I was young, I visited the Bamboo Sea Cave once and had a little friendship with Madame Zhu. Our friendship was not deep, very ordinary." Hearing the name Madame Zhu, Wei Pai showed a fascinated look. It should be known that Madame Zhu was the only mountain god in the Bamboo Sea Cave and rarely showed up. It was rumored that she was slender and taller than men. She was the founder of the School of Novels of the 100 Schools of Thought. She had once aspired to travel all over the world and record the local conditions and customs of the whole world. In one of her records, she had specially named Madame Zhu. Beautiful appearance, likes to go barefoot, and has green hair. Although they were both gods of the mountain god and the land god, compared to Wei Pai, whether it was status or cultivation, they were too far apart. Wei Pai could not even feel ashamed of his inferiority. Deep in his heart, there was only admiration. Madame Zhu's many deeds were quite popular, so much so that even the eastern treasured vase continent was not unfamiliar with her. Under the 10 great grotto heavens, there were 36 small grotto heavens. The pearl grotto heaven that floated above the Great Li dynasty was one of them. The vast territory of 1,000 miles of mountains and rivers was only the smallest of all the small grotto heavens. The small caves were often called secret realms by chi cultivators to distinguish the big caves. The secret realms were usually full of aura. However, compared to the 10 big caves, the small caves were incomplete. Its predecessor could be the ruins of old sites or the ancient battlefield of the Dragon Palace. Its origins were mixed. There were even secret realms called island caves. There were many ancient celestial islands that had mysteriously disappeared in history. It was actually in the stomach of an ancient giant beast, the island whale. Among the 36 small caves, the Bamboo Sea Cave was one of the best. It was rich in all kinds of wonderful bamboos. It was valued by the celestial cultivators of the past dynasties. All kinds of celestial weapons made from these bamboos were popular in the world. Within the cave, there was only one celestial power with a high status. It was the Green Immortal Mountain with a long history. It was said that the founder of the Green Immortal Mountain once asked for advice from the sage of the Confucian school. He brought a young virtuous bamboo as a gift. After that, it thrived in the sacred place of the Confucian school, Virtuous Forest. On the contrary, the Bamboo Sea Cave gradually declined. It was said that this bamboo could record the merits and faults of a gentleman. It was one of the origins of the Book of Merits. When Alliance was chatting with the young landowner, Chen Pingan was sitting on a mountain rock, holding the half of the hatchet in his hand. Not far away, there were 2 terrifying giant heads. After looking at the young man's head, the bodies of the serpents spread out like 2 winding mountain roads, and finally disappeared in the mountain forest. From time to time, there were sounds of trees being swept by their tails. Along the way, Chen Pingan, in addition to learning how to read from Li Baoping, he also learned the official language of Dali from her. He made good progress. Of course, his pronunciation still had a strong accent of the small town. However, in ordinary communication, he could roughly understand the general meaning. Chen Pingan told the serpents that he owned 5 mountains in Longquan County of Dali, hoping that they could move to Luorpa Mountain. Of course, he did not forget to tell them clearly that the sage master Wan wanted to borrow 3 mountains from him. Obviously, the serpents had a much better idea of the importance of the identity of the sage in Lizhu Cave than Chen Pingan. Even the indifferent black snake's eyes changed at that moment. At first, the white serpents were slightly moved when they heard the name of Longquan County of Dali. Later, they heard that the Dali Imperial Court had sent Mr. Kintianjian Qingwu and the officials of the Ministry of Rights to jointly survey more than 60 mountains. Emperor Dali was ready to confer more than one orthodox mountain god. The white serpent's eyes showed unconcealable excitement. They couldn't help but spit out their forked tongues and hissed. As a result, the black snake hit them hard with its head before it quieted down. Seeing that the serpents did not refuse the proposal on the spot, Chen Pingan breathed a sigh of relief and continued, "Although I don't know much about cultivation, I'm very sure that the spiritual qi of Chiduan Mountain is far inferior to that of the mountains in my home. You can cultivate for 100 years in my home territory, which may be comparable to hundreds of years here. Moreover, on the way here, Alliance told me some inside stories about how flood dragons and serpents turn into dragons. This waterway will be very difficult and dangerous. Many mountain gods and river gods will deliberately make things difficult for you and stop you. Therefore, I believe that if you can build a good relationship with Master Wan and the officials of Dali early on, the road may be much smoother in the future." The first half of these words was figured out by Chen Pingan himself, and the second half was Alliance's brilliant plan to reveal the secrets of heaven. Chen Pingan said in a low voice, "An old man who taught me how to burn porcelain once said that the spirits of mountains and rivers may not be worse than humans. After I saw you, I felt that this sentence did not seem to make sense. However, you were subdued by Alliance and have little to do with me. Since Alliance is willing to let you go, I can't say anything. If I had the ability of Alliance, you would dare to provoke me and eat people in front of me." Chen Pingan lifted the half of the hatchet in his hand and stared at the white python. "Then you're not only missing half of your wings. Our supper last night was a big jar of snake stew." The white python had lost its wings and its cultivation was severely damaged. It was already extremely distressed. At this time, the teenager was rubbing salt on its wound. The cold-blooded beast was furious as if its scar was being exposed in front of its face. It raised its head high and its body suddenly tensed up. It was about to pounce forward to kill this annoying and hateful teenager. Chen Pingan was indifferent. The black snake moved as well. It did not help the white snake deal with the straw-sandaled youth. Instead, it opened its mouth and bit the white snake's neck. Then, it flung the slender white snake, which only had half of its body, to the ground, and threw it to the ground. The young man was shocked. He was about to make a move to calm down the white python and the black python, so that the young man wouldn't be accidentally hurt and he wouldn't be affected by the two animals. However, he heard the bamboo hat man shake his head and whisper, "Don't interfere." The young man was somewhat puzzled. He could not help but look at the man. He saw that the man was still leaning against the green bamboo with one foot on the ground. He stood in a lazy posture with his hands crossed in front of his chest. The snakes and pythons of the same species confronted each other fiercely. Chen Pingan stood up, but he did not leave the stone. He held the hatchet tightly. It was unknown what the two of them communicated, but the white python finally gradually calmed down. However, it still looked at the teenager with a fierce gaze. Chen Pingan looked straight at the white python. "Now, there are thousands of people building roads in the mountains. After you enter the mountains to cultivate, you can't kill people just to fill your stomachs. Of course, if it's for self-protection, such as when cultivators enter the mountains to kill you, it's a different story. If you break the rules after getting benefits, then Master Wan will take action. What you did before has nothing to do with me. However, if you agree to enter the mountains, then what you do after that will be related to me." Chen Pingan said seriously, "So I'll say the ugly words first." The black snake remained in its original position, silent and motionless. The white python seemed to be angry. Although it gave up the impulse to shed all pretense of cordiality, even if the temptation of the great path was right in front of it, the white python still slowly rubbed its abdomen against the ground, emitting an irritable and violent aura. In the bamboo forest in the distance, Alliance sat on a bamboo without anyone noticing. The green bamboo, which was extremely resilient, was crushed into an arch bridge by him. The young landowner, who wished he could hold up the green bamboo with both hands, glanced at the confrontation between the teenager and the snake, and explained, although the black snake is more cruel and fierce, it has more enlightenment. It has even learned to judge the situation and know when to advance and retreat. The white python usually doesn't seem to have the intention to hurt people, but it's more troublesome to communicate with it because it follows its heart more. This is related to their positions on the chessboard at that time. The white python is just an idle piece, but the black snake is the key to slaying the dragon. Therefore, they have been kings of Chessblock Mountain for so many years. The white python likes to wander around. Many disturbances are caused by its movements. On the other hand, the black snake is more focused on cultivation. It diligently absorbs the essence of the sun and the moon every day because of its great ambition. Alliance made a sound of agreement. The young landowner hesitated for a moment and said, "The teenager's words are not bad. What he said is true, but he still doesn't know enough about the habits of the snakes. For them who have embarked on the path of cultivation, the nature of their hearts is the cornerstone of the Great Way. In addition, the snakes who have enlightened their acupores probably know the importance of face. They are used to tyrannizing in Chessblock Mountain, so they will feel that going to the teenager's mountain is like living under someone else's roof. Especially when the teenager mentioned a sage and threatened to kill them if they dared to eat people, the snakes will feel that the teenager is overbearing and not easy to get along with. They will inevitably be resentful. After all, once they agree, they will be neighbors for hundreds of years." Alliance interrupted his long-winded speech. "You don't have to find ways to plead for your neighbor. Since I said that I won't interfere, what are you afraid of?" In the final analysis, the snakes are unwilling to bow their heads early because they feel that the teenager in the second realm of martial arts is not qualified to be on an equal footing with them. So even if the teenager's request is reasonable, they will still find it difficult to tolerate it. "If it were me, what do you think the snakes would do?" The young landowner smiled embarrassedly. "Great Immortal, you can see through people and things clearly." Alliance said indifferently, "Answer my question." The young landowner was as silent as a cicada in winter for a moment. After thinking about how to phrase it, he answered seriously, "They will move without saying a word. They don't even dare to hold a grudge." Alliance looked in that direction as usual and nodded. "Very good. You have saved half of the bamboo forest." Crackling noises could be heard coming from the bamboo forest around them. About half of the green bamboo seemed to have been cut in half by a knife and fell to the ground. The young landowner knelt on the ground and said in a trembling voice, "Great Immortal, please don't be angry." Alliance was too lazy to pay attention to this guy. His face was indifferent as he slowly said, "See, even if you have scared people, just because you are too easy to talk to and have a good temper, you will be fooled by a little landowner. So, it is very difficult to be a good person." The young landowner didn't dare to breathe. Alliance suddenly said with a smile, "Get up and talk. It's inappropriate to kneel. I'll make a bet with you. Let's bet whether that moneygrubber teenager is willing to make a losing deal. You bet that he is willing, and I bet that he is not willing. If you win the bet, you can keep the remaining half of the bamboo forest. If you lose the bet, didn't you just restore the body of the landowner? I'll beat you back to your original form." The young landowner, who had just stood up, wanted to die at this moment. He murmured, "May I ask, Great Immortal, what is the chance of this little one winning?" Alliance stretched out a finger. The young landowner's face was pale. 10% chance of winning. The man in the bamboo hat grinned and said, "It's 1%. Then Alliance looked at the teenager and shouted, "Chen Pingan, just open your lion's mouth. I, Alliance, will keep an eye on it. Don't be afraid of angering those two animals. If there is a conflict, you can use the pair of snakes to practice. Don't worry, I will help you look at the situation. When the time is right, I will definitely make a move. Didn't you previously exchange pointers with the 5th level expert Shuhei? After the exchange, you clearly have some understanding. You might as well strike while the iron is hot. Maybe you can make further progress. The young landowner was dumbstruck. Alliance said with a smile, sorry, you don't even have that little chance of winning now. The young landowner's heart was dead like ashes. Instead, he had some extra courage. He turned his head and said with a wry smile, Senior Alliance, your gambling character is really not very good. The man in the bamboo hat said something strange, tossing and turning just for a sure win situation. Do you think that I, Alliance, am so boring? The young landowner chewed on these words carefully. He looked at the teenager named Chen Pingan again with both envy and pity. A moment later, a white rainbow of sword chi that was enough to shake mountains rose into the sky. The young landowner was so scared that he fell to the ground. The figure of the man in the bamboo hat disappeared from the green bamboo pole in the shape of an arch bridge in an instant. He came to the sky above Chiduan Mountain and quickly pulled out the green-sheathed bamboo knife at his waist. He cut the white rainbow in half and did not let it continue to rise into the sky. A moment later, Alliance sat back on the bamboo pole that had not been straightened and casually threw away the broken bamboo knife made of ordinary material. Although it was not broken, the whole knife was broken. The black snake fled madly into the depths of the dense forest of Chiduan Mountain. Not far in front of the young man, the white python that had pounced on him without warning had already lost its entire head at this moment, revealing a mangled and bloody neck. It was a ghastly sight, and it was extremely tragic. Chen Pingan's face was calm, and he grinned. The look in his eyes was exactly the same as when he killed Cai Qinqian of Mount Yunxia in the alley. Alliance held back his laughter. He took off the small gourd at his waist and drank a mouthful of wine. He laughed in a low voice, it's a bit interesting. 103. The green bamboo suddenly straightened. It turned out that Alliance had jumped to the ground and reached out to pull up the lord of the land of Chiduan Mountain. He chuckled and said, my gambling character is not good, but your gambling luck is very good. The young lord of the land's face was snow-white and frowned. Although he had survived the disaster and managed to save the remaining half of the bamboo forest, when he saw the white python whose head had been blown off in the distance, the young lord of the land could not help but have mixed feelings. For hundreds of years, they had lived next to each other. Although they were evil neighbors and had constant friction, they had generally lived in peace. At least, they had never fought to the death. Today, the snake python should have been about to embark on the bright road of cultivation, but at this time, its head was blown off by someone's fierce sword chi. It could be imagined how great the shock it brought to him was. The young lord of the land sighed and bowed dejectedly. He said softly, as Senior thinks, I'm a lowly Philistine who will not be beaten for 3 days. But now, I'm really full after a beating. I hope Senior Alliance can pity me. I'm really scared out of my wits and I don't have the slightest bit of heart. Next, Senior Alliance, just say the word and I'll do it. Alliance did not deliberately mystify him. He looked down at the empty green bamboo scabbard and nodded. You pick a better old bamboo. I want to exchange it for a bamboo knife. Take it as a gift from your friend. Also, there are so many bamboos that fell on the ground inexplicably. It's not good to waste them. The lord of the land and Wei Pai's mouth twitched. He only dared to curse in his heart, Senior Alliance, you're heartless. Alliance, you're good. Alliance rubbed his chin. My friend made a losing deal and indirectly helped you win half of the bamboo forest. One should be kind and repay kindness. What do you think? Wei Pai smiled bitterly. It's only right and proper. Chen Pingan took half of the hatchet and ran to the white python's corpse. He chopped off the remaining wing. It was crystal clear and as long as a human's arm. Touching it in his hand, it was as cold as snow. Under the sunlight, it constantly flashed with a burst of brilliant colors. Alliance had mentioned before that the most valuable thing on this white python was the snake's gallbladder and its wings, which were priceless and priceless. The rest of the python's skin, tendons, and bones were also rare and valuable, but they were far more precious than the first two. Chen Pingan hung the hatchet at his waist and jogged toward the bamboo forest. In the end, he saw the young landowner bending over and half-squatting, pulling a green bamboo out of the ground with both hands. Underneath the ground, the jade-green bamboo whips intertwined with each other. As the green bamboo was pulled out of the ground, the nearby soil was splashed up by the bamboo whips. After seeing the straw sandals teenager who killed and stole the golden belt, the young landowner, who was sweating profusely, swallowed subconsciously. Then he gently put the green bamboo back into the soil and looked around. Finally, he chose a green bamboo whip that was as thick as a child's arm. He sighed and looked up at Chen Pingan. With a forced smile, he asked, "Can you lend me the hatchet?" Chen Pingan approached and handed half of the hatchet to the young landowner. The latter held the hatchet and took a deep breath. After cutting off the bamboo whip, he handed it to Alliance. Alliance shook his head and said with a smile, "Make one according to the style of my previous bamboo knife. When we leave the border of Chiduan Mountain, just give it to me together with the white donkey." Wei Pai naturally did not dare to refuse. When he returned the hatchet to Chen Pingan, he sincerely sighed with emotion, "What a sharp blade." Chen Pingan took the hatchet, thought for a moment, and said, "If you want, I can give it to you. Anyway, this half of the hatchet is not suitable for opening the mountain and leading the way. It's not of much use to me." Wei Pai laughed dryly and said, "A gentleman doesn't take what others like." Alliance said with a smile, "If you want it but feel embarrassed to ask for it for free, you can buy it. It's a fair trade, right?" Wei Pai had an enlightened look on his face. He stood up and rubbed the soil off his hands. He said to Chen Pingan with a smile, "If you're a mountain woodcutter who often goes into the mountains, you'll know that if a bamboo forest is too dense, it's not conducive to the growth of bamboo. Only when the density is appropriate can the bamboo forest grow, so some of it has to be cut down. Moreover, the truly valuable part of this bamboo forest is the bamboo vines that are connected to the roots of the mountain, not the bamboo poles on the ground. Just now, I took the opportunity to borrow the bamboo blade from Senior Alliance and cut down some of the excess bamboo poles. I originally wanted to build a small bamboo house for resting and enjoying the scenery during my leisure time. Now, Senior A. Liang's bamboo blade has been broken by me. I'm ashamed to say that from the first time I saw it, I coveted the half of the hatchet in your hand. Otherwise, I would have made the bamboo blade as well. The bamboo building will still be built. Later, I can hand the bamboo blade to a Liang early, but the small bamboo building will probably be completed later. When the Black Snake heads to Longquan County's Luopa Mountain, I'll accompany it. It's to prevent it from going all the way north and causing any trouble. At the same time, it can carry these bamboos. When I reach Luopa Mountain, I'll find a place with beautiful scenery and pleasant scenery to build a bamboo building for you." Chen Pingan looked at Alliance. The man in the bamboo hat explained with a smile, "There are 10 most important celestial bamboos in the Bamboo Sea Cave. Bamboos have 10 virtues, and the celestial bamboos correspond to them. The ancestor of this bamboo forest is the son of the valiant bamboo. The disciples and grand-disciples in this bamboo forest have also benefited from it. If they build a bamboo house and cultivate in it all year round, it will be very beneficial for pure martial artists or military cultivators." Wei Pai quickly echoed, "Yes, the bamboo forest here is the son of the valiant celestial bamboo. The historical records say that the military power has been raised, such as the broken bamboo. After a few sections, it will be easily solved, which coincides with this meaning. Therefore, cultivating in the bamboo house will definitely be very nourishing for the soul." Chen Pingan was about to speak, but Alliance quickly stepped forward, put his arm around the young man's shoulder, and walked out of the bamboo forest. It's hard to refuse such kindness. The guest should follow the host's wishes. "Let's go." Chen Pingan whispered, "The hatchet hasn't been given to him yet." Alliance said casually, "Later, give him the half of the hatchet in the basket." After that, the man in the bamboo hat did not forget to turn around and remind him, "Don't take the unformed white python's gallbladder. It's bloody and too scary. Give it to the black snake to eat together with the python's flesh. In this way, even if it loses a pair of wings, it can still increase its cultivation by 200 or 300 years. Take it as our sincerity. Remember to make it cultivate honestly after it settles down in Luopa Mountain." Finally, Alliance stretched out his hand and pointed to the young man who was in a daze. "Take care of yourself." The young man stood at the edge of the bamboo forest, looking at the backs of the two people. The mountain breeze in the forest passed through the green trees and clusters of red flowers, bringing a refreshing fragrance of flowers and trees. The young man, who was as beautiful as a stunner, was holding the green bamboo cane that symbolized his identity. His white clothes fluttered, and his big sleeves fluttered. The previous shock, fear, anxiety, and hesitation were swept away by the breeze, replaced by the solemnity that was consistent with the identity of a god. He looked around and sighed softly. Fortune and misfortune go hand in hand. It's just like this. Thank you, Alliance, for your unintentional advice. You helped me untie the knot in my heart and break through the demon barrier. The young man closed his eyes, with a warm smile on the corner of his mouth, and murmured, "Since ancient times, famous mountains have been waiting for saints. It doesn't matter if the saints don't come. I can concentrate on becoming a saint." When he opened his eyes, there was a light golden earring on the handsome man's ear. The delicate earring swayed slightly with the mountain breeze, making the young man look like a mountain god. The two people returned to the pool the way they came. Unlike when they came, they chose to take a walk and chat. "Alliance, will the black snake really eat the remains of the white python? Aren't they partners who have depended on each other for hundreds of years? The black snake is determined to become a flood dragon, so of course it will eat it. Not only the flood dragon, but all the mountain spirits and ghosts also eat. It's just that the flood dragons, snakes, and pythons that live in the mountains and swamps are especially cannibalistic. This is similar to the principle that two tigers can't live in one mountain. The reason why the black snake kept the white python alive is that it has been enlightened and its spiritual wisdom has increased. It also has the idea of eating the white python after it forms its core. By the way, if you want to see the black snake eat the white python, we can go back. Let's forget about it. Speaking of which, don't blame me for making a decision for you and agreeing to let the black snake eat the python's gallbladder. Since it will go to Luorpa Mountain to help you guard your luck, then the gallbladder will be sold by you. No matter how high the price is, it's not as good as the black snake becoming an inky flood dragon earlier. I'm actually very curious about why you killed the white python. Why didn't you wait for me to stop you? After taming the white python, it would be a good deal to let it go to Baoyu Mountain or Iridescent Clouds Peak. Are you afraid that I, Alliance, will not help it? How is that possible, Alliance? I trust you. Then you. Alliance, before I answer your question, I also want to know if you saw that I found the 3 acupoints when I was sparring with Juhi? And the truth within the acupoints. To tell the truth, I knew from the beginning that there was something strange within those 3 acupoints. There was a great mystery, but it was rather embarrassing to say it out loud. Even I couldn't see it clearly, and could only guess that it was strands of sword chi that contained 3 types of Tao insights. As for which 3 types, I didn't dare to be sure. Of course, if I wanted to forcefully see the scene within your chi palace, I wouldn't hesitate to harm your body's chi. It's just that it would be very despicable. As a peerless expert, I, Alliance, naturally have the demeanor and bearing of an expert. I understand. Alliance, do you know that our town has a memorial arch with 4 plaques on it? I know that there is such a thing. Chi Jing-chun mentioned it to me in the past, but I didn't remember the contents and had long since forgotten. One of the plaques has 4 words written on it: "Don't ask for anything from the outside." I have a person of the same age next door who has read a lot. He said that this is a Buddhist doctrine, which means to warn everyone to focus on cultivating the Buddhist Dharma, and not to ask for anything from those outside the Buddhist Dharma. At first, I felt that it was very reasonable, but later on, when I was burning charcoal on the mountain and had nothing to do, I was bored and blindly pondering. I felt that for me, whether it was burning incense, praying to Buddha, or paying respect to Bodhisattva, I had to first do what was within my ability. If I still couldn't achieve my wish, then there was really no other way, and I had to go ask for it. Only then would Bodhisattva nod in agreement. Otherwise, why would Bodhisattva help you? Right, Alliance. To seek Buddha, one must seek oneself first. Right. That's what I meant. Yes, if you explain it this way, it's barely reasonable. But I have to make one thing clear to you. I, Alliance, can dig out a little bit from my fingernails, and it's still better than your family's. So you feel that it's very troublesome for me, so you'd rather lose a strand of sword chi? In fact, to me, Alliance, it's just a small matter of casually unsheathing a blade. This account, you have to calculate it this way. You can't calculate it this way. Old man Yarrow, who taught me how to burn porcelain, was rarely willing to talk to me, but there were 2 times when he spoke very harshly. I remember it very clearly. The first time was when I was a kill worker's apprentice. He said that it was fine to learn how to burn porcelain from me, but if you dared to slack off even once, you would get out of the dragon kill. The second time was when I went into the mountain with him for the first time. He said that it was fine to go into the mountain with me to find soil, but no matter what happened, if you dared to cry in front of me once, you would never go into the mountain again. What are you talking about? Chen Pingan, what do you mean? Then let me put it another way. Alliance, do you like to sleep in? Nonsense, you don't like it. I like it too, but you might not believe it. Since the first day I was a kill worker's apprentice, until today, I have never slept in. When I should wake up, I would wake up as soon as I opened my eyes, so I haven't slept in even once. Beating around the bush, what are you trying to say? Are you trying to bully me, Alliance, for not being a scholar? What I mean is that if you feel that something is not good, then don't do it for the first time, don't do it even once, and don't take even a small step out. Otherwise, when you look back, you will be the one who suffers. Just like me, if I were to slack off once, I would definitely not be able to become a kill worker's apprentice, let alone enter the mountain. Then, how would I be where I am today? Maybe I am now similar to the thousands of young men in the small town, going into the mountain to open the road, cutting wood to build bridges, and getting some copper coins every day. How can there be 5 mountains? How much is 5 mountains worth? Alliance, do you know? Alliance, if you have the chance in the future, you must come to my mountain to take a look. Stop. Chen Pingan, you beat around the bush with me just to show off your wealth. Alliance, you really haven't studied. Alliance, in the future, if there is really a bamboo building in my Luo Po mountain, can you help me give it a name? Alliance is very fierce building, how about it? Is it imposing enough? What, do you dislike it for stealing the limelight and overshadowing you, the king of the mountain? Alright, then I will change it to a more reserved one. Let's call it fierce building. I, Alliance, have sacrificed a lot, are you still not satisfied? Alliance, I suddenly feel that the bamboo building doesn't have a name is quite good. The bamboo hat man rolled his eyes. Chen Pingan laughed, don't worry, let's call it fierce building. Alliance suddenly turned his head and asked, do you want to learn swordsmanship? Chen Pingan shook his head and said, not at the moment. Alliance smiled knowingly, are you afraid of being distracted? Delaying your practice? Chen Pingan sighed and nodded. Alliance knew why the teenager sighed. At the peak of Chiduan Mountain, in order to stop the white python from killing the Li family's servant Zhu Lu, the teenager had squandered all the capital that he had painstakingly accumulated from practicing the stance and practicing martial arts. If it was said that he was originally like a small family with a little money in hand, the result was that he was beaten back to his original state. Once again, his house was in a pitiful state. From the door to the window, it was a bleak scene of leaking air. Fortunately, the walking stance was a strong and healthy body. It was the most important thing to do to survive. As for the upright stance sword furnace, it could nourish the soul. In the battle on the stone platform, he had a breakthrough. This was the foundation for when he sparred with Zhu He later, when the youth was able to accurately find the chakra points where the 3 sword chis were hidden. Alliance joked, losing such a powerful life-saving sword chi, does it hurt? Chen Pingan said without hesitation, it doesn't hurt. The anger that I had accumulated in my heart has finally been released. Now it's very satisfying. Alliance smiled and said, tell me about it. Chen Pingan looked forward, I am willing to reason with others, and I can make others listen to me. This feeling is very good. In the past, I practiced martial arts to strengthen my body, or to survive, But now I feel that the goal can be a little further, a little higher. 104. The mountain tortoises were native to the Chiduan mountain, so they were naturally familiar with the mountain shortcuts. In addition, their legs were much stronger than donkeys and mules when it came to traversing the mountains. Carrying them, they soon arrived at the border of the Chiduan mountain. After walking south for more than 20 miles, they would be able to enter Red Candle Town. Although the road to the north was now blocked because of the sudden fall of the Black Pearl Cave, Chen Pingan and the others still chose to be careful. They did not want the 3 giant tortoises to disturb the woodcutters, hunters, or traveling merchants. Chen Pingan and the rest sat on the top of the hill to rest. Li Huai was looking forward to it. He hated the young land, but Alliance said that there were treasures hidden in the Hungbao Pavilion and everyone had a share. Li Huai was looking forward to it. He thought to himself that he would make his sister jealous when he saw her in the future. The Earth Lord of the Chiduan Mountain soon arrived as promised. This time, he did not use the supernatural power of shrinking the ground into inches. He walked up the mountain in large strides, his white robes fluttering in the wind. His large sleeves were like 2 white clouds drifting up the mountain. Even the maidservant Zhu Lu had to admit that if one only looked at his appearance, the young Earth Lord was worthy of the description of handsome in the books. Behind the handsome man were Alliance's white donkey and the Li family's horse. It was unknown what kind of magic the Lord of the Land used. Not only did they keep up with the big team, but they also did not look tired at all. Wei Pai, who had lived for hundreds of years, held the long wooden box horizontally and bowed to the man in the bamboo hat. The latter nodded in return. The shrewd god and the cynical strange swordsman gave off the same feeling at this moment. They walked together on the Great Way. Wei Ba handed over a bright red wooden box made of an unknown material to Ah Liang. Li Huai hurriedly went over to touch it. His palm was full of warmth. When he touched it, it felt like the fine silk and satin that was the treasure of a cloth shop in Riding Dragon Alley. At the end of last year, he had followed his mother and sister to buy cloth and tailor new clothes. He had only secretly touched the beautiful brocade embroidered with flowers and birds before he was driven out by the flustered and exasperated shop owner. Li Huai looked up and asked, "Alliance, I want to discuss something with you. After we divide the treasures in the box, can you give me the box in the end?" Alliance asked back, "Who do you think you are?" Li Huai said seriously, "You married my sister, so I'm your brother-in-law." Alliance slapped him, "Then call me brother-in-law." The child suddenly said, "I don't want to be a brother-in-law. I like to be a brother-in-law. The worst person in the world is a brother-in-law." Alliance looked at Wei Pai and asked, "Is the box valuable?" Wei Pai smiled embarrassedly, "It's okay. It's made of yellow and gloomy wood. It's been buried in the soil for many years. It's fragrant instead of rotting. The color also changed from yellow to red. It's not valuable, but it's not common." Alliance looked down at the hopeful child, "Since it's not valuable, I'll give it to you." Li Huai wanted to take the wooden box in a hurry, but he was slapped by Alliance. "You want to keep it for yourself." Alliance looked around, waved his hand, and then squatted on the ground. He opened the long wooden box called Delicate Yellow and shouted, "Chen Pingan, Little Treasure Bottle, Lin Shuyi, Zhu He, Zhu Lu, all come here. It's time to divide the loot. First come, first served. There are no other rules except for one. Everyone can only take one item from Baibao Pavilion. You can take whatever you take. No regrets." Chen Pingan looked at the young man, who noticed his gaze. He was a little confused and asked in a gentle voice, "Aren't you going to fight for the opportunity?" Chen Pingan smiled, "Let them take it first." Chen Pingan happened to have something to discuss with the young man. It was about Black Snake Settlement in Luopa Mountain and Wei Pai's departure from the territory to Longquan County. On the way back, Alliance roughly told them about the rules of the righteous gods of mountains and rivers. They could not easily leave the territory of the imperial court. This was a bit similar to the rule that vassal kings could not meet each other that was set by many dynasties. Once someone broke the taboo, those gods would be punished by the imperial court and their incense offerings would be reduced. In serious cases, They would be demoted and their incense offerings would be completely cut off for many years. In history, there were many gods of mountains and rivers who broke the rules, and their fate was even more miserable. The golden statues were pulled out of the shrines by the imperial court and pulled down from the altar. The Yamen runners beat them with mighty sticks as a warning to others. Some local officials personally whipped them, and some even directly sent people to beat them up. This happened in the history of various countries. Therefore, when Wei Pai said that he would personally take Black Snake to Luopa Mountain and build a bamboo house on the mountain with those valiant bamboos, Chen Pinggan naturally wouldn't reject his good intentions. However, he also didn't want Wei Pai to be severely punished because of this. In fact, the young man had never been able to deeply understand the incense offerings of Shinto, the feng shui of mountains and rivers, and the fate of dynasties. This was also related to Alliance's lack of education. This guy stepped on a watermelon skin and said whatever he wanted to say. He spoke very mysteriously and deliberately liked to keep people in suspense. Originally, there was nothing strange or profound about the matter, but he could also make it mysterious and profound. Later, it was Li Baoping who gave an example that Chen Pinggan's thoughts suddenly became clear. The little girl said that the incense offerings of Shinto was like the Dragon Whisker Creek outside the town. There was only one water source, and the people would compete for water for the harvest of their respective crops. Almost every year, there would be large-scale fights. Li Baoping ran to Chen Pinggan's side and said anxiously, "Little martial uncle, why don't you go and get the treasure? You see, even someone like Lin Shuyi is running so fast." Li Huai can't wait to stuff his head into the 100 Treasures Pavilion. Chen Pinggan said casually, "It's okay. I've already chosen the last one." Li Baoping turned around and ran. "It's okay. Little martial uncle will help you choose one." Chen Pinggan was about to speak when the little girl in the red cotton-padded jacket had already rushed to Alliance's side. She pushed Li Huai's head away with one hand and pushed Lin Shuyi's shoulder with the other. Li Huai said with grievance, "Li Baoping, you're bullying me." Li Baoping turned around and said righteously, "I'm picking something for little martial uncle." Li Huai thought of the small bamboo box that had not yet been in his hands and sighed, "Then you choose." Lin Shuyi was not angry when he was pushed away. He pointed to a rolled-up ancient book in the 100 Treasures Pavilion. It was tied up with a golden silk thread, just revealing the title of the book written in Yunzhuan. "I've chosen this Taoist book called Cloud Gem Book. I only want it and won't compete with you for other things." Li Huai leaned forward and stretched his neck. He slightly bypassed Li Baoping and asked, "Shuyi, why don't you choose that knife? It's so beautiful. If it were me, I would choose it." It took a lot of effort for Lin Shuyi to move his eyes away from the narrow saber that occupied the largest area of Baibao Pavilion. He said softly, "I'm not good at martial arts, and I don't like to practice sabers or swords." Li Huai saw that Lin Shuyi was unwilling to change his original intention, so he began to persuade Li Baoping, "This knife, at first glance, is an unparalleled weapon in the world. I guess it can even cut the iron chain of our town's iron lock well." Li Baoping, "Such a good thing, you really don't want it. Besides, isn't your little martial uncle a good weapon now? I think it's good for him to use this knife. Taking a step back, it's more impressive to use it to open a path in the mountain. It's better than holding a broken knife, right?" That narrow knife, even if it was like a lady hiding in an embroidery house, was lying quietly in the white scabbard with a beautiful arc. Alliance smiled and bent down to pull out the narrow knife. The blade was like a white rainbow that lingered in the world. There were no inscriptions on the blade, but there were natural lines, like the talisman of auspicious clouds carved by the Taoist immortals. Alliance was slightly surprised. He flicked his finger. There was no turbid buzzing sound, but a clear and melodious vibrato. Alliance listened for a moment and nodded. Yes, it should be the auspicious symbol at the bottom. Alliance put the knife back into the scabbard and handed it to the little girl. He smiled and said, "Take it. This knife suits you. Later, find a sword-nourishing gourd and this auspicious symbol knife and hang them on your waist. Find a tall horse, wear a red dress, ride the horse alone in Jianghu, and drink wine on the horse. Everyone who sees you will like it." Alliance laughed heartily. Who wouldn't like such a girl? Li Baoping stared blankly at the heavy narrow knife in her hand. Zhu He was also squatting nearby. Zhu Lu didn't want to come over at first. She even said that she didn't want the food that was given to her in a fit of pique. However, her father glared at her sternly and then pulled her over. This was the first time the girl saw her father angry. She was a little scared, but she still didn't want to squat down like Zhu He. She stood there stubbornly with a cold face. Li Huai took advantage of Li Baoping's inattention to grab a palm-sized painted puppet. The workmanship was exquisite and lifelike. This was the object that he fell in love with at first sight. Lin Shuyi gently picked up the rolled-up ancient Taoist book. After holding it in his hand, the introverted young man revealed a joyful expression for the first time. Zhu He picked a book and a sealed medicinal pill. Then, he looked up at the bamboo hat man with a shocked expression. The latter laughed and said, "What? Are these things that you and your daughter can use? Don't thank me. If you want to thank someone, you should thank Wei Ba and Snake Python." After thousands of years of hard work, they've accumulated enough wealth to be able to take out a martial arts manual from an immortal mansion and a unique medicinal pill from Martial Mountain. Zhu He held the medicinal pill in his palm and said in a trembling voice, "Senior Alliance, is it really the legendary hero's courage?" Alliance ignored the ecstatic Zhu He and looked up. Chen Pinggan and Wei Pai were walking side by side. The latter saw the only pale golden seed left in the treasure pavilion and the narrow saber in Li Baoping's hand. The young man looked calm. Then, when he saw the books and medicinal pills in the hands of the others, he was stunned and could not help but look at the bamboo hat man. The latter ignored him and smiled at Chen Pinggan. "This is the only thing left. But I guess it's the same whether you arrive early or late. You'll only get this lotus seed." Seeing the lonely pale golden lotus seed, Chen Pinggan squatted down, picked it up with a smile, and put it in his sleeve pocket. Li Baoping said softly, "Junior Martial Uncle, I'll trade with you." Alliance said that this saber is very good. Speaking of this, the little girl quickly shut her mouth with a face full of regret. Obviously, she should not have said the latter half of the sentence. Sure enough, Chen Pinggan touched her head and said, "Okay, take it. Junior Martial Uncle doesn't practice using sabers. A chopper is enough to open a path in the mountain." Alliance joked, "Yes, Chen Pinggan is a swordsman. A saber is not suitable for him." Chen Pinggan said angrily, "Then why do you use a bamboo knife?" Alliance said shamelessly, "It's none of your business." Li Huai said softly, "Alliance, this box is mine, right?" Alliance asked, "What do you want this box for? Do you have so many treasures to put in it?" Li Huai retorted, "It's none of your business. Everyone had their own gains. Even the young local tyrant Wei Ba and the black snake were the same. Other than the white python whose head had been blown up and its body eaten, it could be said that everyone was happy." Chen Pinggan got a slightly shriveled pale golden lotus seed the size of a thumb. Li Baoping got the narrow saber called the auspicious symbol, but she was a little unhappy. She leaned it against the small bookcase with some disdain. However, according to her junior martial uncle's suggestion, she wrapped the saber with a piece of cotton cloth from head to toe. It was tightly wrapped and did not expose the saber. Li Huai got the painted puppet and the delicate yellow wooden box. The former was temporarily borrowed in Li Baoping's bookcase. Before putting it in the box, the child was very reluctant to let it go. She patted her chest and promised the puppet that when she had her own bookcase, she would let it move and ensure that it was spacious. Lin Shuyi kept the Cloud Gem book close to his body. The name was strange, but it was full of ancient meaning. Although Zhu Lu was reluctant, she still accepted the Immortal's secret book, the Book of Purple Clouds. Zhu He was a very steady man who could not stop smiling. It was not Zhu He, but he was too lucky. Even if you gave him a mountain of gold and silver, it was not as good as the hero's gallbladder of Zhenwu Mountain, which could not be bought with money. This medicine could help the person who took it condense the scattered soul in the acupoints and Qi mansion, and finally form a house hero's gallbladder that was convenient for the yin spirit to rest in. Zhu He was not a Qi cultivator, nor was he a military cultivator. However, the hero's gallbladder was precious precisely because it was also suitable for pure martial artists, especially martial artists who were stagnant at the peak of the fifth realm. Obtaining a hero's gallbladder was equivalent to having half a life. Alliance asked softly, "How was your chat with the Lord of the Land?" Chen Pingan smiled and said, "Very good. I also gave away the things in the bag." Alliance clicked his tongue and said, "You're not careless at all. You gave it away just like that." "I was just casually saying before. Besides, if we're talking about business, you should actually treat it as a business deal. I believe that with the wealth of the black snake and the white python, no matter how stingy they are, they will be willing to give you something really good." Chen Pingan said, "I still understand the principle of not letting the fertile water flow into the fields of others, as well as the principle of planting in spring and harvesting in autumn." Alliance nodded and adjusted his bamboo hat. "We'll be arriving at Red Candle Town soon." Then the man wiped his saliva and said, "New apricot spring wine, Rouge small pleasure boat, I, Alliance, am back." Chen Pingan suddenly had an ominous premonition about the Red Candle Town that Alliance had been longing for. Wei Pai looked at the back of the group of people descending the mountain and sighed. He tapped his toes and flew to the top of a mountain tortoise's shell and sat down cross-legged. After traveling for dozens of li, the black snake with its bulging abdomen accompanied him from afar. Although its body was bloated, its aura had soared and it was abnormally fierce. Wei Pai suddenly smiled and threw a bag at it, which happened to fall on its path. The black snake carefully lowered its head and sniffed. There was nothing unusual, so it turned its head to look at the immortal on the mountain tortoise. The handsome man who looked like a banished immortal smiled and said, "Consider it a housewarming gift from that young man." The black snake with 4 claws and 4 toes hesitated for a moment and finally tore open the bag with its teeth. A dozen snake gall stones that the young man had picked up from the Dragon Whisker Creek rolled out. The color of the gall stones had faded in the creek. At first glance, they looked no different from the pebbles in the ordinary creek. However, after the black snake stared at them closely, its eyes were burning hot and full of anxiety. It was afraid that it would be disappointed in the next moment. It slowly spat out its tongue and tentatively rolled a stone into its mouth. After seeing this, the young man continued to ride the mountain tortoise and said to himself, "A good beginning, but I don't know if it will end well." After a moment, the black snake behind him grabbed the ground with its 4 claws and looked up at the sky. It let out a roar that resounded through the mountain and startled countless birds that were flapping their wings and flying away. Even the young man was a little envious. "I heard that except for the Pearl Cave, this thing is almost extinct in the eastern bottle continent. It belongs to the flood dragon species. Eating it can give birth to the muscles, bones, whiskers, and scales of a real dragon." As they approached the Red Candle Town, the white donkey stepped on the bluestone road, making a crisp ticking sound. Alliance did not hold the reins of the donkey as it would follow him. After hearing the roar, Alliance smiled and said, "It seems that it's really useful." Chen Pingan whispered, "I kept the most valuable snake gall stone. I didn't want to give it away." Alliance laughed, "You're a thief." At the back of the group, after pulling away from Li Huai and Lin Shuyi, Zhu He whispered to his daughter while leading the horse, "You must keep the purple chi book well. If everything goes well, this book can help you reach the 5th realm. At that time, with the help of the hero's gall, you can reach the 6th realm." The girl was stunned. "Father, if you give me the pill, what will you do?" Zhu He chuckled, "Father is still young. Now that your spirit has returned, you might be able to break through by yourself and take a big step forward. You'll be at the peak of the 7th realm. Father dares to think about it now." The girl, who had been depressed, smiled and said, "Still young? Then father, do you want to find a beautiful wife in the Red Candle Town?" "Father, don't worry, I won't stop you." Zhu He looked embarrassed and glared at his daughter. "Nonsense." The girl thought for a moment, "Father, you should keep the pill. I'm only at the peak of the 2nd realm now. I'm still far from the 5th realm." Zhu He laughed heartily, "You can keep it. Just think of it as your dowry in the future." The delicate and pretty girl seemed to have thought of someone and her face turned red. Zhu He was in a good mood and said heroically, "In the future, when we come to the capital of our Li dynasty, Let's see which noble family has the fortune to marry my daughter. The girl stamped her feet and said shyly, Father. Zhu quickly waved his hand and said, Don't talk about it. Father won't talk about it. On the post road at dusk, Alliance stood on tiptoe and rubbed his hands as he looked at the gentle silhouette of the red candle town. In the eyes of the bamboo hat man, it was like a beautiful woman lying drunk in a wine shop. He said hurriedly, Chen Pinggan, let's agree in advance. You have to lend me a gold ingot. Chen Pinggan nodded, but he was somewhat puzzled. Alliance, you're short of money? Alliance grinned, You don't understand, do you? In the martial world, the one who borrows is the grandson, and the one who returns is the ancestor. I've been humiliated so miserably by little brats like Li Huai and Zhu Lu. I must enjoy being the ancestor and make it up to myself. Chen Pinggan said helplessly, Then I'll give you a gold ingot. I won't lend it, I'll just give it to you. Alliance slapped the youth's shoulder and laughed, then it settled. You'll give me the gold ingot for free. Alliance looked ahead and raised his arm and clenched his fist, to be able to get a gold ingot from a moneygrubber like you for free. I, Alliance, am really fierce. Chen Pinggan didn't go back on his word. He just quietly looked at the red candle town that was getting closer and closer. The familiar smell of the market hit him in the face. It was no longer the surging river and the deep mountains and forests. Chen Pinggan turned to the girl in the red cotton-padded jacket and said with a smile, When we reach the town, after buying all the food and necessities on the road, we'll go and see if there's any tanghulu for sale. Li Baoping happily skipped forward, the little girl gently bouncing the small green book box on her back. Little martial uncle. We'll just buy 2 tanghulu skewers. The small ones are delicious. 105. Red Candle Town was surrounded by high walls. Chen Pinggan and his party needed to enter the town from the north gate, but an accident soon occurred. There were armored soldiers guarding the gate, and they needed to submit their residence documents before they could enter. Chen Pinggan was stunned on the spot. He didn't even know what the residence documents were. Alliance, who had already received a gold ingot, grinned and took out a wrinkled document from his bosom. After passing the inspection, this guy didn't even want his donkey and swaggered into the town alone. When he reached the gate, he didn't forget to wave goodbye to the people who were looking at each other in dismay. Li Huai scolded him and threatened to kill the white donkey. Alliance laughed and left. Zhu was also helpless. Before leaving the town, the ancestor didn't specifically instruct him about this. In fact, except for his age, Zhu knew nothing about the outside world. He was no better than Chen Pinggan. As for traveling mountains and rivers, eating and sleeping in the open, he was far inferior to the poor boy who used to be a kill worker. Zhu suddenly had an idea. He thought that money could make the devil turn millstones. It must be a universal principle. He was about to secretly give money to a soldier, but the young soldier directly pointed a spear at his chest and reprimanded him sternly. Even the good-tempered Zhu was a little angry. As a warrior of the Fifth Realm, if he joined the army, he might even become a middle-level general with thousands of elite soldiers. However, when Zhu was about to argue with the man, Zhu Lu gently pulled his arm and reminded him softly, Father, our Dali military law is clear about rewards and punishments. It is either very light or very heavy, so don't get into a conflict with these soldiers. We common people won't have any advantage. Zhu frowned and snorted coldly. In the end, he still chose not to fight with the officials. Zhu Lu comforted him in a low voice, Father, in the future, let the ancestor help you find an official identity. With the amulet and your skills, I believe you will soon be able to stand out. You don't need to endure this. Zhu strode away and nodded. He glanced back at the gatekeeper and sneered, It's really like the old saying, the king of hell is easy to meet, but the little ghosts are hard to deal with. Everyone subconsciously looked at Chen Pinggan. Chen Pinggan thought for a moment and slowly said, There is no other way. We can only go around Red Candle Town and sleep outside tonight. We can hire people to help us buy everything we need. The real trouble is that we can't go to the water transport wharf in the town. The established itinerary will have to be changed. The original more than 200 miles of water route will be much easier than walking along the Embroidery River, and we won't have to take a detour. At this time, a middle-aged man in a blue official uniform quickly walked out of the city gate. He carefully sized up Chen Pinggan and his party. Finally, he looked at Zhu He and asked with cupped fists, "This one is Zhu He, now the posthouse official of Red Candletown's Pillow Inn. May I ask if you are Mr. Zhu from Longquan County?" Zhu He was silent and looked alert. The man who claimed to be the posthouse official laughed heartily. "Your family head once sent a letter directly to our county magistrate, briefly explaining your itinerary and asking our county magistrate to be the host. In addition, each of your letters have already arrived at our Pillow Inn. I specially vacated the room for you 10 days ago. It can only be said that it's clean and plain, but I dare not say that it's very good. Please forgive me and don't complain to our county magistrate. Otherwise, if our county magistrate is unhappy, I'm afraid I'll lose my job tomorrow." The posthouse official suddenly remembered something. "If Mr. Zhu doesn't believe me, I can immediately go to the posthouse and call someone here. This person comes from Longquan County's Fulu Street and says that he is an old government servant of the supervising officer's office. One of the letters came from Dallas Capital, which he personally brought on behalf of his superior. He said that he wanted to personally deliver it to a young master named Lin Shuyi." Lin Shuyi took a few steps forward, his face full of the conceit and arrogance of an aristocratic family's son. He asked, "I am Lin Shuyi from Longquan County. May I ask posthouse official Cheng, what is his name?" The maidservant Zhu Lu was a little stunned. At this time, Lin Shuyi was not the same as the taciturn and cold young man in her impression. Li Baoping and Li Huai looked at each other and nodded slightly. Cheng Sheng's words were not stagnant at all. "If I remember correctly, his name should be Tang Shitu. He is in his 40s and can't speak Dallas official language very well. Well, this person especially likes to drink, but when he is drunk..." Lin Shuyi nodded and asked casually, "Has the posthouse official been waiting for us at the North Gate these days?" The man smiled and said, "Although I want to nod, I really don't have the face to do so. In fact, the Pillow Posthouse is north of Red Candle Town, not far from here. Secondly, there is a beacon on the top of the mountain near the town. I have a good relationship with Captain Sway, so I asked him to help keep an eye on the road down the mountain in the north. As long as he sees Mr. Zhu's figure, he will ask his subordinates to enter the city to inform me." Lin Shuyi understood and stopped talking. He turned to Chen Pinggan and the latter nodded. Zhu He smiled and thanked him. "Lord Cheng, thank you for your trouble." The posthouse official hurriedly waved his hand and said, "I don't deserve to be called Lord. I'm just a lowly person who serves the noble all day long. It's really difficult for me to be called Lord Cheng. Let's not talk for now. I'll go and inform the guards. I believe they will enter our town soon." The posthouse official belonged to the Dali Imperial Court, but he was not an official of the Imperial Court. This kind of official did not belong to the ranks and did not belong to the ranks. There was a huge gap between the clean and the turbid officials. Soon, the posthouse official led them to the gate of the city wall. Although the guards let them go, their faces were still not very good. The posthouse official took the lead and walked through the particularly shady gate of the city wall. He turned to Zhu He and explained in a low voice, "They are all veterans who retired from the border battlefield. They are not very capable, but they are stubborn. Sometimes, even our county magistrate can't do anything to them. Mr. Zhu, don't lower yourself to their level." Zhu He did not have any Jianghu experience, but he still understood the principle of saying more to a stranger. So, he did not answer. They passed by a shop that was full of cold air. There were young and strong men coming in and out constantly. From time to time, there was a flash of white light in the shop. Li Huai could not move his feet. Zhu He could not help but look at it a few more times. Soon, he lost interest. The posthouse official said, "That is a knife and sword shop. Other weapons are also sold occasionally." Lin Shuyi asked curiously, "The government doesn't care? Aren't they afraid that the people in the market will fight with weapons?" The posthouse official smiled and said, "The government doesn't care too much about these things. But as long as something happens, it will be very strict. If the county government is not enough manpower, The county magistrate can mobilize all the Jianghu sects in the territory to help solve the dispute. Dali valued martial arts. There were many wanderers who traveled around with swords and sabers. Some of them were street scoundrels who were arrogant but incompetent, but there were also children of noble families who were chivalrous. Although the Dali imperial court prohibited the sale of all weapons, most of them turned a blind eye to ordinary swords and sabers made with mediocre craftsmanship. It mainly depended on the attitude of the local officials. If they were pure scholars, most of them would be strictly prohibited. If they were warriors from the battlefield, most of them would be lenient. Of course, strong bows, strong crossbows, fine armor, and other national weapons were not allowed to be sold anywhere. Beacon towers, relay stations, markets, taverns, brothels, and so on and so forth. Red Candle Town had everything one could think of, and it was extraordinarily bustling. The streets were filled with people, and it was much more bustling than the small town in Chen Ping'an's hometown. There were all sorts of shops on both sides of the streets that dazzled the eyes, and shouts rose and fell in succession. After chatting all the way, they arrived at the Pillow Inn after an incense stick's worth of time. Soon, the handymen of the post house took the white donkey and the horse away. Cheng Sheng had indeed arranged post house for them. There were both A and B post house. He did not make a decision on his own. Instead, he threw 5 post house to Zhu He and let them arrange it themselves. Under Chen Ping'an's arrangement, Li Baoping and Zhu Lu lived in a first-class post house. Zhu He lived in a first-class post house. He, Li Huai, and Lin Shuyi each lived in a second-class post house. If Alliance came back, he could choose any one of the post houses to live in. Of course, with Alliance's temper, he would certainly ask if he could choose Zhu Lu's post house. At that time, Zhu Lu would probably roll her eyes at him. In the twilight, everyone put away their luggage and packages and gathered in Zhu He's spacious first-class post house. Cheng Sheng quickly sent a stack of letters home. After sending them, he said goodbye with a smile, saying that they only needed to shout if they needed anything. He also said that the night market of Red Candle Town was a little famous in the south of Dali. If there was a chance, they must see it. Lin Shuyi had 1 letter, Li Baoping had the most with 3, and even Chen Ping'an had 1. Li Huai was empty-handed. Finally, he found Zhu Lu, who was in a similar situation, and said with a smile, "Fortunately, we are in the same boat." Zhu Lu turned a deaf ear to him and walked to the window. The small pillow post house had a deep winding path, creating a courtyard with a deep aristocratic garden. Looking from here, it looked like a small lake the size of a palm, and there were many fat red and yellow koi fish. Lin Shuyi's letter was only a piece of paper without many words. The youth took a deep breath and put the so-called letter back into the envelope. Then, he left the post house with a gloomy face. His 5 fingers tightly clenched the envelope. In addition to more than 30 sloppy semicursive characters, there was also a banknote worth 300 taels of silver from the largest bank in Dali. The youth strode back to the post house, gently closed the door, and put the envelope on the table. His face was ashen, and his chest was heaving up and down. Chen Ping'an picked a secluded place and sat down. Li Baoping ran over and looked like she wanted to say something. He smiled and said, "If I don't know the characters, I will ask you." Li Baoping returned to the table and began to open the letters. There were 3 letters from her father, her eldest brother, and her second brother. Li Baoping opened the letters one by one. His father, Li Hong, wrote many words of concern in the letters. As usual, he did not put on the airs of a strict father. He only reminded him of trivial matters, such as wearing more clothes when the weather was cold, not being afraid of spending money outside, and that he must send a letter home to his parents every time he passed by the relay station. He was long-winded, and 5 to 6 letters were gone just like that. Li Baoping sighed and looked at Zhu He, who was sitting across the table and drinking tea. She said worriedly, "When will father and mother stop treating me like a child?" Zhu He could not help but laugh and drink tea. Li Baoping browsed the second letter. It was written by the eldest grandson of the Li family, her eldest brother. He was now studying the classics at home, preparing to take the imperial examination next year. The content of the letter was concise and to the point. It was written in a regular script, as if it was full of the charm of a teacher sitting upright. Every stroke revealed a strong sense of cautiousness. It was full of sages and sages. He told her not to neglect Zhu He and Zhu Lu, and not to treat them as children of the family. He told her to listen more to the words of Chen Pingan from the Mud Bottle Alley. She should be able to endure hardships and not cause trouble for others. However, at the end of the letter, her eldest brother, who had been scrupulous in etiquette since childhood, told her that he had already raised the crab he caught from the stream when she was young. He told her not to worry about it. Li Baoping raised the letter in her hand and complained to Zhu He, "My eldest brother doesn't care about me the most." Zhu He held back his laughter. He thought to himself, "Miss, come on. Who doesn't know that in the Li family, it is the eldest young master who cares about you the most?" The first time a bookworm like him, who was difficult to reason with even the ancestors, drank wine, his tea was secretly changed by his younger sister to the home-brewed peach blossom spring wine. The eldest young master was so angry that he almost collapsed. When his parents saw it, they were afraid and did not dare to persuade him. They only dared to follow their son, who ran to find his younger sister to denounce her. They were afraid that this slightly pedantic son would teach his younger sister a lesson in anger. He never thought that when he saw that lass standing outside the courtyard with her hands on her hips, as if she was looking at death calmly, he couldn't bear to scold her. He was so angry that he turned around and left, sulking for several days. Later, he buried a jar of peach blossom spring wine in his courtyard. When his younger sister asked about it, he said that he was going to marry her off. The little girl was so scared that she secretly ran away from home. She wandered around the Longshu Creek for a whole day and almost hid in the mountains. When the Li family realized that Li Baoping was missing, the ancestors were furious and sent everyone to look for this silly girl. In the end, it was the eldest young master who made up for his mistake. He found the poor girl sleeping on a bench in a small temple on the other side of the creek and carried her home. The little girl in the red jacket suddenly smiled and said, "But I still like my eldest brother the most." The last letter was a thick stack of letters. It was sent by the second young master of the Li family to his younger sister. He told her about his experience in the capital of Dali. It was all anecdotes that he had seen with his own eyes or heard from others. The words were beautiful like prose, and he was very skillful. He was like a talented poet. In the Li family on Fulu Street, the second young master was far more popular than his eldest brother. He was handsome and elegant, but also humorous. He liked to read books on the art of war. Since he was young, he liked to let the maids and servants form a battle array to kill. Compared to the old-fashioned and dull eldest young master, the servants in the residence preferred to deal with the cheerful second young master. During festivals, the second young master would throw a small embroidered bag to people as a tip. It was heavy. If someone had good luck, he would give an extra embroidered bag. Li Baoping flipped through the letters quickly. When she reached the second last letter, she looked up at Zhu Lu and said, "My second brother talked about you. He talked about the peace fire of Dallas Beacon that he told you before. He once stayed at the peak of a mountain at night and saw with his own eyes the beacon signal that was used to report peace to the capital from the border. When he looked into the distance, it looked like a long flaming dragon. It was very spectacular." Zhu Lu quickly walked back to the table and sat down. She asked, "Miss, what else did he say?" Li Baoping simply handed the whole stack of letters to Zhu Lu. On the other hand, her second brother talked about local customs and customs. There was nothing unspeakable. Zhu Lu took the letters and asked, "Can I take it back and read it slowly?" Li Baoping nodded and said, "As long as it doesn't get lost." Zhu Lu's face was full of joy. She smiled and left. Cheng Sheng knocked on the door and entered, carrying a pot of fresh fruits. Behind him was a man wearing a bamboo hat. Li Huai was furious. He ran over and wanted to push this heartless bastard out of the room. Alliance was competing with Li Huai while sitting on a stool by the table. He asked with a mischievous smile, "What's wrong with Zhu Lu? Her face is full of spring breeze and she looks even prettier than usual." His face was dark and he didn't say anything. Lin Shuyi returned and sat down near Chen Pingan. Alliance tossed a small silver gourd to Lin Shuyi. The youth pulled out the cork and took a sip. Alliance turned to the posthouse official and asked, "Is there a watershed in Red Candle Town? Isn't it too far from the harbor?" The posthouse official's expression was strange. He nodded and said, "There is." Alliance clicked his tongue and said, "A money-squandering den, a money-squandering den." There was a crescent-shaped river bend in Red Candle Town, where a type of exquisite pleasure boat unique to Red Candle Town floated. It was less than 20 to 30 feet long and was surrounded by either purple or ordinary green bamboo. The luxurious decoration inside was determined by the wealth of the owner of the pleasure boat. Generally, there were 2 to 3 women on each pleasure boat. Most of them were beautiful women and young girls who were proficient in zither, chess, calligraphy, painting, tea, and wine. In addition to the viewing room, there was also a bedroom. Its function was self-evident. Those boatmen's daughters were from the Great Lee's lowly households for generations. According to legend, they were once the remnants of the divine water nation of the previous dynasty. The Great Lee's emperor had issued an imperial edict that they were never allowed to go ashore, and that their descendants would be rootless duckweeds for generations to come. The people of Red Candle Town passed down from generation to generation that the lord of the land of Chiduan Mountain not far away was loyal and righteous. He secretly sheltered the ancestors of these surnames during their escape. As a result, Emperor Dali was enraged and demoted him from a mountain god to a land god. He ordered the descendants of these surnames to personally break their golden bodies and sink them to the bottom of the river. The posthouse officer carefully chose his words and selected some harmless stories from the small town to tell the important guests. Red Candle Town was not the hub of Dallas North and South, but it was a busy harbor for water transportation with many boats shuttling in and out. It was the confluence of 3 rivers, namely the Chongdan River, the Xiuhua River and the Yuye River. However, there were only 2 river gods. There were temples built on the banks of the river, and clay statues of the gods with golden bodies were built. Both of them were the commanders of the Dali Navy who died in the naval battle. Only the Chongdan River did not have a river god and did not have an ancestral temple. Later, there was a temple of the Empress, which was full of incense. It was dedicated to a woman from a small town who committed suicide by jumping into the river to prove her innocence. As a result, it was quickly designated as an obscene temple by the Dali imperial court. Now, there was only a pile of ruins, broken bricks and tiles, and only snakes and rats running around. When he heard about the deeds of the lord of the land of Chiduan Mountain, Li Huai whispered, "I didn't expect such a big bad guy to have such a good reputation in Red Candle Town." Lin Shuyi's face was indifferent. Every family has its own difficulties. Chen Pinggan put away the letter sent by Ruan Xiu. The letter said that the Luopa mountain he bought was successfully conferred with the title of a new mountain god of Dali. He helped to gather spiritual energy on the mountain, which was second only to the Cloud Mountain, which was not involved in the sale, and the Lantern Mountain, which was owned by her father. 106. The posthouse official told them that there was no night curfew in Red Candle Town, and there was a market in the west of the town. Although it was small, it had all kinds of sundries. Knowing that Chen Pinggan and his companions were going to buy the things they needed for their study tour, Cheng Sheng offered to be their guide, saying that it would save them a lot of trouble, and at least those merchants would not dare to ask for sky-high prices. Chen Pinggan looked at Alliance, who had been to Red Candle Town once. The bamboo hat man nodded and said that he was only familiar with the scenery on both sides of the river and had never been to the market. The posthouse official looked at Alliance, and the 2 old men smiled knowingly. There were nearly 100 large and small gala-painted pleasure boats in Tushire Bay. Every night, they would sail out of the bay and enter Red Candle Town along the river. After circling around, they would return to Tushire Bay. During this period, men would constantly board those gala-painted pleasure boats to get drunk and laugh. In Red Candle Town, although the girls of the boatmen in Tushire Bay and the other girls in the brothels were all of Dali, the former had always been directly managed by the musical house in the capital city. Even the county magistrate, as a local official, was not qualified to change the identity of the girls in the gala-painted pleasure boats. Therefore, There had always been a rumor in Red Candle Town that the ancestors of the 5 families in Tushire Bay were once the royal children and meritorious families of the Holy Water dynasty. Under the guidance of Cheng Sheng, the local leader, Chen Pingan and the others went to the market on the west side of the town. The further west they went, the more crowded the streets became. After learning that Red Candle Town was more than 200 li south by boat, and there would be relay stations along the way for them to replenish their supplies, Chen Pingan gave up on some of his ideas. He did not buy too much rice, bacon, and other food, but bought a lot of medicinal ointments in a pharmacy to deal with minor illnesses such as cold, heatstroke, and injuries. When it was time to spend money, Chen Pingan realized that a whole silver ingot was almost the same as the town in his hometown. Therefore, he converted the 2 ingots of snow-patterned silver into Dali copper coins, Tianhua ingots. Because he had the best quality silver, the premium alone was as high as 200 copper coins, which made Chen Pingan very grateful to Miss Xiuxiu in the blacksmith shop. Because post-house officer Cheng Sheng was by his side, everything went smoothly. In a small town in a county, it was true that officials were not officials. Especially someone like Cheng Sheng, who often interacted with tycoons, magnates, and traveling officials all year round. In the eyes of the people of the small town, he was a big shot who knew everything. Therefore, whenever Chen Pingan and the others walked into a shop, they would greet Lord Cheng politely, wishing they could worship this post-house officer like a bodhisattva. Along the way, Li Huai was very reserved. He only dared to hide behind Alliance, sticking his head out and looking around. Alliance teased him that he was timid and only knew how to be a tyrant in his own home. Li Huai had just opened his mouth to argue with Alliance for 300 rounds, but when he received curious gazes from all around, Li Huai immediately drooped his head and followed behind Alliance sickly. This made Alliance extremely happy. From time to time, he would slap Li Huai's head. The child was angry, but did not dare to say anything. He was very sullen. Lin Shuyi was still indifferent, as if the matter had nothing to do with him. Presumably, even if this young man was walking on the imperial road in the capital, he would still be like this. Only Li Baoping carried her dark green bamboo box. Like a crab running amok, she raised her head and puffed out her chest. She wished she could just randomly pull someone on the side of the road and tell them that her little box was personally made by her youngest martial uncle. The market square was made up of 2 main streets running north-south. After strolling through Guanshan Street, Chen Pingan and the others were about to cross an alley and head to the next Guanshui Street. In the end, they passed by a deserted bookstore in the alley. Cheng Sheng, who was leading the way, went straight ahead. However, Chen Pingan stopped. After greeting the posthouse official, he smiled at Li Baoping and the others and said, "Each of you can buy a book. It doesn't matter how expensive it is, as long as we can afford it." The store was very small. The door was less than 20 feet wide. After walking in, there were 2 rows of tall book walls on the left and right. In the innermost part of the store, a young man in a black robe was sitting on a small bamboo chair with his legs crossed. He was resting with his eyes closed and holding a folded fan in his hand. He gently tapped the palm of his hand and hummed a little tune. The young store owner had a handsome and feminine face. He didn't have the stink of money of the merchants in the previous stores. When the young girl Zhu Lu saw him for the first time, she was stunned. She probably didn't expect to meet such a distinguished person with a refined temperament in the marketplace of Red Candle Town. After the lord of the land of Chestun Mountain got rid of the shackles, he regained his identity as a god. He changed from a short old man in white to a handsome and noble young master. However, in the young girl's heart, Wei Pai was more of a sloppy and unbearable image. However, the young master in front of her gave her a very distinct first impression. Even Zhu He was full of doubts. Could this person be a descendant of a powerful family whose family had declined? He was no worse than the 2 young masters in his family. The young man didn't open his eyes. "Languid," he said, "the books in the store don't bargain. Whether you make a profit or lose money depends on your judgment." The posthouse officer Cheng Sheng whispered to Zhu He, "This shop is a little famous in our Red Candle Town. Most of the scholars who pass by here like to visit here at least once. However, this shop owner has a strange temper. All the books he sells are much higher than the market price. Moreover, if anyone dares to bargain, he will drive them away on the spot. He is aloof and doesn't know how to handle affairs of the public. There was once an official from the Ministry of Revenue who was on a private visit and stayed at My Pillow Inn. That official took a fancy to a unique book that was priced at 300 taels of silver, but he only bargained for 50 taels of silver and was driven out of the shop without leaving any face for him. That official was so angry that he didn't calm down even after he returned to the post house and almost asked the county government to close this small shop. Perhaps he thought that it would be bad for his reputation, so he let this shop escape a disaster. Juhi understood in his heart that the store owner was most likely a pedantic scholar who didn't know about the affairs of the world. He was the kind of person that the second young master liked to ridicule the most. The second young master called him a king who talked about his temperament with sleeves folded and died to repay the king. The second young master also laughed and said that in less than 200 years, their dally would be the same. Therefore, Juhi had never had a good impression of the scholars outside. The courier route through Red Candle Town was one of the 3 main courier routes from the southern border of Delhi to the capital. Merchants and officials of small stature often chose this route if they wanted to go north to the important towns and cities of Delhi. This was because although the other 2 routes were wider, almost every inn along the way was overcrowded. Without enough authority to check on them, not to mention staying in the inn, one couldn't even enter the main gate. Every year, many officials and tyrants who didn't know this way lost face because of this. The southern scholars who came to the capital to take the imperial examinations, because they didn't have official positions, liked to choose this route. They often traveled in groups of 2 or 3. Not only could they take care of each other, the scenery along the way was beautiful, and they could also explore the underworld and visit immortals together. As for the officials who were demoted to the south, they were depressed and unhappy. They liked to inscribe poems on the walls of the inn and they also liked to take this route to the south. Gradually, the walls of the Pillow Inn in Red Candle Town were filled with the complaining poems of scholars and poets. Li Baoping looked up and began to look for books. She glanced here and there, depending on her mood. Occasionally, she would pick out a book and casually flip through a few pages. If she wasn't interested, she would put it back. Finally, the little girl found a travel book of mountains and rivers. It was priced at 300 copper coins. She was a little distressed, but she really liked it. She turned to look at her youngest martial uncle. Chen Pinggan smiled and nodded. Lin Shuyi's gaze slowly swept over the wall of books in an orderly manner. From right to left, from top to bottom. Every time he picked out a book, he would start from the title page. Finally, the youth took a fancy to a geomancy book that didn't have the author's name on it. It was priced at 400 copper coins. Lin Shuyi looked at Chen Pinggan, and the latter still nodded. After Li Huai arrived at the shop, the noise on the street was finally gone. He immediately returned to his naughty nature, almost like a runaway wild horse. He was the youngest and the shortest, so he insisted on sitting on Alliance's shoulder to pick a book. Alliance agreed, but threatened that if Li Huai didn't pick a book, he would leave him alone on the street after they left the shop. In the end, Li Huai braced himself and picked a brand new book on the highest shelf. It was priced at 9 taels and 2 copper coins. When he saw the price, Li Huai was so scared that he wanted to sneakily throw the book over. However, he was flustered and the book didn't succeed in being stuffed back into the shelf. Instead, it fell to the ground. The young shop owner who tapped his folding fan opened his eyes and looked at the book that fell to the ground. He said angrily, "Buy it and leave." 1 copy of the latest edition of Great Water Cliff, 9 taels and 2 copper coins. Li Huai didn't dare to talk back to a stranger. He could only cry and carefully look at Chen Pinggan. The latter asked, "Do you know how to read it after buying it?" Li Huai nodded vigorously. Chen Pinggan smiled and nodded, "Then I'll buy it." Alliance asked, "Chen Pinggan, don't you want to buy one?" Chen Pinggan, who was taking out money, quickly shook his head and said, "I haven't learned all the words yet. Why would I buy a book?" Zhu He turned to ask his daughter, "Is there a book you want?" Zhu Lu still stood at the door of the shop and didn't move. She glanced at the wall of books and shook her head. The young shop owner who was about to take the money stood up. He tied his hair with an ebony hairpin and held a snow-white folding fan in his hand. He glanced at the little girl in the red cotton-padded jacket and the cold young man, and finally looked at the child who was timidly holding the Book of Great Watercliff with a playful smile. Alliance grinned. Leaving the bookstore and walking to Guanxue Street, Zhu's heart was moved. He looked back and found that the good-looking young man was leaning against the doorpost and watching them leave. After seeing Zhu, the man smiled and nodded to greet him. Zhu turned his head and frowned. After leaving the alley, he quickly walked to the bamboo hat man. Senior Alliance, is the owner of the bookstore strange? Alliance held his bamboo hat and said something really strange. Compared to this guy, the real trouble is still to come, but it has nothing to do with you. The Chongdan River was the most turbulent river with many hidden reefs and dangerous shoals. It was famous for its wonders. In one section of the river, many large and small stone pillars protruded from the water surface, which was known as the bamboo shoots after the rain. Only a small boat could shuttle through the gaps of the stone forest. It was difficult for a big boat to cross. Even the boatman who grew up on the river and was familiar with the water didn't dare to take a boat into the water, unless it was a scholar who paid a lot of money to hire a boat. Therefore, there was also the white paper small boat Tai Suigong saying that every year there would be boatmen and foreigners who lost their lives on this section of Chongdanjiang's stone forest waterway. However, there were many tourists in the Chongdan River at dusk tonight. The surging river water crashed against the stone pillars. A bare-chested man sat on top of one of the stone pillars, gently tossing an empty wine pot into the river water. Beside him were 3 unopened wine pots. In the distance, a red light was getting closer and closer. It turned out to be a hunchback old man holding a big red lantern. He used the stone pillars as steps to wade in the river, like a dragonfly skimming the water surface. Suddenly, a majestic figure descended from the sky and stepped on top of a stone pillar. The solid stone under his feet couldn't bear the weight and turned into powder in an instant. He stood in the river just like that. In the river, a middle-aged woman was swimming against the current, leisurely strolling. 3 feet above her head floated a fist-sized snow-white bead. It emitted a bright light, illuminating the bottom of the river as bright as day. The woman said lazily, "I walked for more than 100 miles and didn't find a single treasure. Who told me that there are flowers under the Chongdan River?" The man sitting on top of the stone pillar looked at the bottom of the river and said indifferently, "Sir is already in Red Candle Town." The old man shook the bright red lantern and laughed with a hoarse voice, "Sir is actually going out in person? Then what do the 4 of us need to do? Sit on the bench and watch the show?" The man drank a mouthful of wine and said in a deep voice, "I hope so." 107. After strolling around Guanxue Street, Chen Pinggan had bought everything he needed. He was about to go home when Alliance proposed to take a night boat trip to the Chongdan River. Only Lin Shuyi agreed. Chen Pinggan didn't mind going to the dangerous beach after putting away his things, but Li Baoping tugged at his sleeve. Chen Pinggan understood and weighed some coins in his purse. The scattered copper coins were enough to buy some candid whores. Zhu Lu took her father, Zhu He, to the weapon shop. Li Huai complained that he was hungry, so Alliance asked the posthouse official to take him back to Pillow Rest for supper. The group parted ways. Lin Shuyi walked side by side with the bamboo hat man and asked softly, "Senior, you said that Li Huai is the most blessed. Is the seemingly brand new Duanxirei cliff the most valuable?" Alliance nodded gently and revealed a secret. "It just looks new. It's a few years old. The things written in the book aren't worth much. It's a mess of water magic cultivation. It's deliberately used to mislead people. But the material of the book is more precious. It won't be eaten by worms even if it's stored for hundreds of years." Alliance took off the small gourd and drank a mouthful of wine. "And if I'm not wrong, this book has already given birth to a few Moby fish. Of course, you can't see them with your naked eyes. This thing is one of the world's spirits. It's extremely subtle and swims between the lines, just like the living fish in the river. The Moby fish uses the spiritual chi contained in the book as bait. After it grows, It's no bigger than the thickness of a hair. There are many kinds of Moby fish in the world. The species in that book is ordinary, but if it's sold to a high-ranking official who likes to hunt for novelty, it should be worth at least 3,000 taels of silver. So it's one of the most valuable books in that bookstore. The young man was speechless. The Moby fish that he couldn't even see could be sold for 3,000 taels of silver. Was money the most worthless thing in the world outside the town? Alliance seemed to see through the young man's thoughts. He smiled and said, "When you really set foot on cultivation in the future, you'll understand that the gold and silver in the eyes of the common people can be piled up like a mountain. It's just a matter of a snap of the finger. By the way, since money must be spent like running water, it means that the vulgar things are the most valuable." Lin Shuyi nodded. Alliance smiled and said, "If you tell Chen Pinggan these things, he may not understand." Lin Shuyi shook his head. "It's about money. He definitely knows." Alliance laughed and brought the young man to the riverbank of Red Candle Town. It was a hubbub of voices. The young man was used to the quiet night of his hometown, so he was not used to it. Especially every time he breathed, he seemed to be able to smell the scent of cosmetics. At first, he would feel that the fragrance would assail his nostrils, but after smelling it for a while, he felt a little sick. When the two of them passed through the alley and came to the riverbank, their vision suddenly opened up. Both sides of the river were covered with thick bluestone roads. Orioles and swallows were chattering and laughing. Many beautiful women were leaning against the railings of tall buildings, revealing their white lotus-like tender arms. The women's clothes were mostly red and green. A series of lanterns hung from the tall buildings, illuminating the women's faces and making them look even more enchanting. Pleasure boats of different sizes were slowly moving along both sides of the river with bamboo curtains hanging down. Most of the boats had two women sitting at the front and back of the boat, with another person rowing. Compared to the women in the tall buildings who were unbridled and loudly soliciting business, although the women on the boats were also wearing revealing clothes, their expressions were more demure. The younger women were like the pretty girls of the neighborhood, while the older women were like the daughters of noble families. From time to time, some of the women in the tall buildings would ridicule and abuse the women on the boats who were competing for business, throwing fruits and vegetables. The latter were used to it and did not care much. Unless they were hit on the spot, they rarely got up and scolded them. Once the women on the boats and the women in the brothels had a conflict, it would inevitably cause a group of men to cheer in unison, as if they wanted to see the world in chaos. Lin Shuyi felt his scalp go numb. "Senior Alliance, aren't we going to the Chongdan River to enjoy the scenery?" Alliance shamelessly said, "Since it's the confluence of the three rivers, then this is naturally the Chongdan River." Lin Shuyi was speechless. A liang squatted by the river and looked at the pleasure boats that slowly sailed past. Every time a boatwoman secretly gave him a flirtatious look or greeted him with soft words, a liang would silently take a sip of wine and murmur to himself. Lin Shuyi squatted down and pricked up his ears to eavesdrop. Intermittently, he heard something about keeping one's chastity, being a gentleman, lust is a knife above a knife, and so on. Lin Shuyi couldn't help but laugh. "Well, it turns out that a liang is no better than me." Alliance turned his head slightly and looked at a small pleasure boat not far away. An average-looking woman sat at the bow of the boat and looked around confidently. She did not look like a woman who was in the flesh business, but more like a rich and powerful woman who was on a night tour. On the other hand, the 28-year-old girl rowing the boat behind the woman looked delicate and beautiful. Alliance stood up and waited for the boat to come closer. This chapter is not finished. Please turn the page. 108. At Yefu Pass on the border of Dali, the city gates were wide open. The few light cavalry stationed in the city chose to march at night, which was a rare sight. Although there were less than 1,000 of them, when the iron hooves of the horses stepped on the ground, the earth still shook. It was like the rapid beating of a drum, making one's blood boil. Beside the posthouse, a general stopped his horse with a grave expression on his face. A young deputy general with a hideous scar on his face rushed over. After slowing down, he stood beside the general and asked softly, "General Han, what is the purpose of this attack to the north?" Dali has a vast territory to the north of Yefu Pass. How can there be a large number of horse bandits and roving bandits? Even if there are, it's not our turn to take action, right? The stocky general said in a low voice, "Don't ask what you shouldn't ask." The young general grinned and didn't ask any more questions. The general of the Yefu Pass cavalry hesitated for a moment, probably because he was feeling uncomfortable holding it in. After some deliberation, he said softly, "It's not just our troops at Yefu Pass. All the passes and towns in the south will take out nearly half of their main field light cavalry and mobilize them all tonight." The young general was stunned. The spring search, summer hunt, autumn hunt, and winter hunt, which occurs once every 4 years. But the timing isn't right. We only participated in the spring search last year. Even if there is such a large-scale martial arts exercise this year, it should be in the summer. The general subconsciously touched the soft manner of his mount and said, "After we reach the temporary camp, the Imperial Court's Ministry of War will give the next order. We don't need to think too much." More than 200 miles west of Red Candle Town, in the upper reaches of the vast Xiuhua River, there was a small lonely mountain in the middle of the water. It was crudely called Steamed Bun Mountain by the local people. There was a lonely local temple on the mountain, where incense burned endlessly. It was said to be very efficacious. If one prayed for children, one would get children. If one prayed for wealth, one would get wealth. It was famous far and wide. It was a place where scholars and poets had to visit on boats. However, the local people almost never came here to burn incense. The night of the late spring was cold and murderous. The river water was rolling and splashing in all directions. Vaguely, a 3-foot-long green carp could be seen in the river water, swimming quickly from the shore to the small lonely mountain. The boy in red was sitting on the carp's back. He was only as tall as a palm. His hands were tightly gripping the carp's 2 tentacles like a knight holding the reins. The little boy was moving up and down with the carp and the river water. His whole body was wet, his face was pale, and he was cursing and swearing. When the green carp swam to the shore, it suddenly stopped and directly threw the red-clothed boy onto the shore. The little guy rolled on the ground for a while, his face covered in dust. Facing the big green carp that was swaying back to the other side of the river, he cursed loudly, "If the upper beam is not straight, the lower beam will be crooked. Your master is a slut." The carp suddenly turned around and stared at the boy in red who was on the shore. The latter was so scared that he pissed his pants. He said that a good man does not fight with a woman and quickly ran to the earth temple. The door of the small temple was not closed. The little guy climbed over the threshold with great difficulty and landed on the ground. He raised his head and looked at the funny clay statue that was seriously peeling. He put his hands on his waist and shouted angrily, "I almost drowned in the river water. Why aren't you kneeling down to receive the decree? Do you believe that I won't punish you for being disrespectful and crack your head?" There was a bang. The boy in red was kicked out of the earth temple like a stone. A short man sat on the threshold and scolded, "You're just a child who was born in this broken temple. How dare you call yourself a master in front of me? If they were not a family, they would not enter the same door." The boy in red ran all the way back, gasping for breath. He climbed up the threshold with difficulty and sat down. He grimaced in pain and his eyes were sad. The man frowned and asked, "What's the matter?" The little guy muttered, "I'm a little hungry." The man raised his arm and pretended to hit him. The boy in red hugged his head and shouted, "I just eavesdropped on the news from the city god pavilion in the city. It said that the Ministry of Rights and the Qintianjian of the Imperial Court issued 2 secret decrees. All the gods of the mountains and rivers within 1,000 miles of Red Candle Town are to be on standby. They are not allowed to leave their posts without permission and are not allowed to go into seclusion. They must be on call at any time. If they do not appear on time, they will be beheaded. Damn you, if I didn't pass you the news, with your mischievous personality, you would have been killed by someone else. Oh, I forgot that you are not a human." This time, the little guy was slapped into the earth temple. The man stood up and looked in the direction of Red Candle Town with a solemn expression. He did not forget to remind him, "I left some food for you in the incense burner. Remember to eat it sparingly. At least you have some conscience." I really don't know how you survive. In a province, you are the poor guy who has been in the Earth Temple for the longest time. Not only do you have a bad relationship with your colleagues, but even those shrimp soldiers and crab generals in the Embroidery River dare not to put you in their eyes. Tell me, why am I so unlucky to be born in your furnace? Sigh, I should have found a better incense burner to reincarnate in my next life. The red-clothed boy kept complaining, but that didn't stop him from climbing up the incense burner with familiarity. He dove into the brass incense burner with 7 or 8 incense sticks. On the way back to the Pillow Inn, Cheng Sheng found that the child beside him was gnashing his teeth and sighing, as if he was making a choice of life and death. Li Huai finally stopped and gathered his courage to ask, "Old Cheng, I have 30 coins with me. Can I go to the bookstore to buy a book? How much is the cheapest book there? Can you leave some for me?" The man who was called Old Cheng did not know whether to laugh or cry. After thinking for a while, he replied seriously, "It's difficult. The books in that shop are recognized as cheap in our Red Candle town. Unless you are a scholar who likes to collect rare books, no one will go there to buy books. If you really want to buy books, I know 2 big bookstores in the East. They have Confucian classics, anthologies of philosophers, and supernatural novels. I can help you bargain there." The one-track-minded child shook his head. "No, it has to be the bookstore just now." This was all the surplus food that Li Huai had secretly saved. Most of it was stolen from his uncle's house, and a small part of it was his sister Li Liu's private money. Previously, in the bookstore, the poor fellow who wore straw sandals all year round didn't try to pretend to be rich by buying a lousy book that cost nearly 10 taels of silver without hesitation. He also didn't refuse on the spot because he was unwilling to spend so much money on him. Instead, he asked if he would read the book. This made Li Huai very surprised. Although he had said that he would read it, in fact, after buying it, he would naturally read it to pass the time. Li Huai did not have much interest in this book, Great Water Cliff. But when someone was willing to take out 10 taels of silver for him, Li Huai felt very happy. Li Huai was not stupid. Whether other people treated him well or badly, the child knew very well in his heart, very clearly. Pairs of straw sandals, unfinished book boxes, and this Great Water Cliff book. He owed so much, so Li Huai felt that if he did not do something for Chen Pinggan, he would feel very apologetic. In fact, Li Huai did not like Zhu Lu. He did not even like Lin Shuyi, who had gone through thick and thin with him. Instead, he felt that Li Baoping, who often bullied him in school, was not bad. Li Huai liked the sloppy Alliance the most. As for the pauper from Mud Bottle Alley, Li Huai was a little afraid of him. At this moment, Posthouse Minister Cheng Sheng lowered his head to look at the child who had a serious expression on his face. He thought to himself, as expected of that fellow's so-called immortal aptitude. There were some things that were truly blessed with the soul. He held back his laughter, thinking that he could just go with the flow and help this child. Who knows, maybe he would be able to form a huge relationship with him. Being kind to others, even to 1,000 ordinary teachers, was far better than being kind to an immortal. This was what he had seen with his own eyes and heard with his own ears. It was absolutely true. Cheng Sheng took the child to the alley between the 2 streets. The young shopkeeper was sitting on the threshold and looking at them with a smile, as if he had been waiting for their arrival. At this time, at the other end of the alley, a stooped old man with a lantern walked in and faced Li Huai. The young man slowly got up and waved his hand at Cheng Sheng. "The bookstore is closed today. I'll bring the child here to buy books later." Cheng Sheng pulled Li Huai without saying anything and turned around to leave. After confirming that the 2 of them had left the alley, the elegant and refined young master no longer had his previous tranquility and ease. He appeared slightly respectful and uneasy as he cupped his fists and said softly, "Li Jin of Chongdanjiang pays his respects to Master Lang Zhong." The white-haired old man nodded with one hand behind his back and the other holding a lantern. He stepped over the threshold of the bookstore and the young man who stepped aside followed him. The old man inserted the handle of the lantern into the lower end of a book high on the wall and turned to look at the young man with a jade-like face. He sighed with emotion. "When you and I first met 40 years ago, you had such a face. Now that we meet again, you are still the same. You are envious." The young man clenched his folding fan and smiled. For us aliens, it is a great blessing to be born as a human. The old man nodded and did not refute. The young man asked curiously, "Is it your arrangement that those people can live in the Pillow Inn?" The old man kept silent. The young man did not ask any more. 100 years ago, he opened this small bookstore and watched the affairs of the world with cold eyes. He had seen a lot of the ways of the world and the storms in the officialdom, so he was no stranger to the great Lee's officialdom. To be able to vacate so many first and second post houses in the Pillow Rest Inn, it should be the ability of the assistant ministers of the 6 ministries. Of course, the 3 doctors were an exception. In the Dali Imperial Court, the Lang Zhong was the head official of each division and the minister councillor was the deputy, secondary grade 5. The positions of the Lang Zhong and the minister councillor were not obvious, but there were 3 Lang Zhong and their power was beyond imagination. These were the Ministry of Personnel Meritorious Service Division, the Ministry of War Marshal Selection Division, and the Bureau of Rights. The heads of these 3 divisions could be said to have a low position and power. Once they were sent out, they would definitely become officials of the border. One was in charge of the promotion of all officials in the dynasty below grade 4. One was in charge of the selection and promotion of martial artists for the dynasty. He also had the power to recruit people of the underworld. One was in charge of the sacrificial ceremonies of a country. Many times, the emperor would ask this person for advice. These officials were usually from the Confucian schools. This unassuming old man in front of him was one of them. 40 years ago, Li Jin, as the owner of this bookstore, had given 2 books to a poor scholar who came to the capital for the imperial examinations. Who would have thought that the poor scholar would rise up and become the Lang Zhong of the Dali Bureau of Rights? But to Li Jin, who was far away in the Jianghu, the Ministry of Rights' temple and department for purging officials had another layer of meaning. It was this small yamen. It was said that many officials in the capital could not even find the door, but it was secretly in charge of the selection and evaluation of the righteous gods of the world. Although it did not have the final authority to determine the righteous gods, it had the crucial right to recommend them. Li Jin had learned from the officials and merchants passing by Red Candle Town that the old man had taken this position. He had sent many letters, but all of them had disappeared without a trace. Li Jin did not dare to be rash and could only regretfully give up. The young man who used the alias of Li Jin had been working hard for the position of the god of the Chongdan River. He had used many methods, but all of them had been for naught. The old man suddenly said, "You should know the reason why the Chongdan River does not have a river god position. Thus, I pretended not to see the letters you secretly sent to my residence. It's not that I'm not willing to help, but that I don't have the ability." The young man smiled bitterly and nodded. "I understand. As long as the emperor does not agree, even the words of the Minister of Rights will be useless." The old man smiled and stared at the young man in front of him. Every 20 or 30 years, the young man would change his face and appearance. The old man squinted and said, "But now there is an opportunity in front of you. It depends on whether you dare to fight for it." The young man did not show any excitement and asked back, "I heard that Emperor Dali had conferred a river god of the Longshu River and a river god of the Tiefu River. Mount Biyun, Mount Jianding, and Mount Luopa each conferred a mountain god. He had given 3 mountains and 2 rivers at once, a total of 5 positions. This had already used up a lot of His Majesty's wealth. How could he throw another precious position to the Chongdan River at this time when he was about to run out of money? The old man smiled and said, "Don't worry, it's not a conspiracy against you. To put it bluntly, you don't need me to do it personally." The young man was a little angry from embarrassment, but then he looked helpless and did not speak anymore. The old man restrained his smile and said, "With Red Candle Town as the center, all the gods of mountains and rivers conferred by the Dali Imperial Court, as well as the substitute gods of land and river, need to be on standby and be ready to participate in the encirclement and suppression at any time. Apart from this, the border towns to the south, including Yefu Pass in Dali, dispatched large amounts of elite cavalry, scattering out countless scouts and scouts. As for you, Li Jin, if it were not for the kindness of giving you the book back then, I would never tell you this news. With or without you, There is no difference. Li Jin was shocked to the extreme. What's the use of setting up such a huge formation in the territory of Da Li? What is the encirclement and suppression? The old man said bluntly, a person. Li Jin looked into the old man's eyes and felt that he was not faking it. He asked slowly, Dr. Zhong, what do you need me to do? The old man smiled and said, a small matter within my ability. I just need you to keep an eye on a man who has just arrived in Red Candle Town. Because I know that after leaving the Chongdan River for more than 200 years, you have been doing very well in Red Candle Town. You are more familiar with the waterways than Cheng Huang and the two river gods. And if the records in the capital are correct, you have a few rare black fishes from ancient books. They are most suitable for scouting and transmitting information in a small area. Li Jin's expression was not very good. The old man said sarcastically, relax, the black fishes are indeed rare, but I'm not so low as to be tempted by money. Li Jin laughed self-deprecatingly. It's me who gauged the heart of a gentleman with the yardstick of a villain. He then asked, that person is. The old man slowly replied, a man wearing a bamboo hat with a small silver gourd on his waist. A group of children followed him. Those children came from the former Dragon Pearl Grotto Heaven, which is now Longquan County. As for the man's true identity, Dallas spies have yet to learn it. Li Jin was dumbfounded. That man came to my shop before. The old man's eyes flashed like lightning. Li Jin carefully said, it's just a coincidence. The old man waved his hand and warned, it doesn't matter. From now on, you must remember not to give yourself away. Even if you fail, it's better than making mistakes. You don't have to worry if you accidentally alert the enemy because of your carelessness, because you'll be dead by then. Even if that man doesn't kill you, I'll do it myself. But if this matter succeeds, I can't guarantee that you'll become the river god of Chongdan River, but I can let His Majesty remember your name first. Li Jin said self-deprecatingly, does this count as the Emperor's heart? The old man stopped flipping through the book and turned his head to ask, why? You don't want to? Li Jin laughed and said, wealth comes from danger. Besides, I don't need to do it myself. It's a sure-win deal. I'll do it. He snapped his fingers and two exquisite fish with extremely long tails appeared near his shoulder. They had the same spirit as him. What the fish saw was what Li Jin could see. They swayed their long tails and disappeared in an instant. Before the old man left, he smiled and sighed, the books in your shop are still so expensive. Only at this moment did Li Jin feel that the old man vaguely had the demeanor of the young scholar. The old man took back the lantern and left the shop. The old man walked out of the alley. At the corner stood a burly man with his arms crossed. The two walked side by side. The latter asked, aren't you afraid of being superfluous? The old man said casually, actually, in this hunt, the net has been closed to this point. Even if Li Jin suddenly went crazy and ran to the man called Alliance and revealed the truth, it doesn't matter. The man said in a bad mood, in the end, you still have to return the favor of giving him the book. The old man smiled and showed some conceit. He said softly, the favor I owe is more or less worth some money. Zhu Lu said that she wanted to eat sugar-coated haws. Although he was a little curious about why his daughter suddenly liked sweets, this request was nothing. He took the girl to find a stall. In the end, the father and daughter really did find a stall. There was a hawker carrying a big stick of sugar-coated haws walking through the streets and alleys, shouting loudly. Zhu didn't like such things. Zhu Lu bought 3 sticks in one go. Zhu was a little puzzled. The girl smiled and said that she would eat 1 stick and that the other 2 could be given to the young lady and Chen Pingan. The girl also said that she wanted to apologize to the youth tonight. In any case, she had to apologize to him so that she could feel at ease. Zhu felt as if a heavy burden had been lifted off his shoulders, and he was extremely happy. The father and daughter returned to the relay station and learned that Chen Pingan and Li Baoping had already returned to the pillow relay station. Zhu Lu hadn't finished eating a stick of sugar-coated haws. She chose the courtyard behind the A-grade relay station and asked her father to help her pass a message to Chen Pingan, saying that she wanted to meet Chen Pingan there. Zhu strode away. He found it funny. This girl's skin was too thin. What was so embarrassing about lowering her head and apologizing? Not long after, the straw sandals youth appeared at the end of the painted corridor. After seeing Zhu Lu sitting on the bench at the other end, the youth quickened his pace. There were 15 or 16 sugar-coated haws scattered on the bench beside the girl. The girl stood up with a smile and placed her hands behind her back. Her posture looked delicate and naive. She walked towards the youth. "109. The youth watched as the young girl walked towards him. Her footsteps were light as she walked along the dimly lit corridor. She was like a young deer in the night. Zhu Lu no longer had her usual bossy attitude. She was like a young girl next door who had grown up together, smiling sweetly. Chen Pinggan seemed to be in disbelief. He slowed down his steps and stood still. His eyes widened as he stared at that somewhat unfamiliar, delicate face. Zhu Lu drew her left hand from behind her back and waved at Chen Pinggan. As she walked, she said, "Chen Pinggan, my father wants me to tell you about what happened at the Kadunshiping." 5 steps away, the young girl, who was at the peak of second realm, suddenly charged forward. In just 2 large strides, she was in front of Chen Pinggan in an instant. They were practically staring at each other. The 2 faces could be seen clearly. The young girl's face was filled with savagery, anger, pleasure, and relief. Her expression was extremely complicated. Other than the sadness in the youth's eyes, there was also a sharpness. His gaze carried the sharpness of a hatchet that had been sharpened on the dragon beheading platform. Zhu Lu's left fist went straight for the youth's forehead. This was a smokescreen. The young girl had even deliberately slowed down the speed of her fist. Her true trump card was her right hand. When she struck at lightning speed, she held 3 sharp bamboo skewers in her hand and stabbed them straight at the youth's heart. Just as the bamboo skewers were about to pierce the youth's heart, the young girl, who had gone on a murderous rampage, happened to blurt out the words that she had not finished speaking. "I'm sorry." At this moment, the young girl no longer had any of her lovable and naive demeanor. She was only fierce. However, in the next moment, Zhu Lu's face was filled with shock. She knew that things were not going well and was about to retreat. Chen Pinggan quickly raised his right hand. Not only did he block the young girl's left fist, but he also took advantage of her daring to show weakness to extend his arm forward and choke Zhu Lu's neck. At the same time, the youth's left hand tightly gripped Zhu Lu's right wrist that was filled with killing intent. He pulled it outwards, preventing the 3 candid hawthorn skewers from piercing his heart. The hand that was gripping her neck suddenly exerted force, pulling the girl towards him. He ruthlessly slammed his knee into the girl's abdomen. The force was so great that the girl almost vomited bile from the impact. Her body could not help but curl up, and she immediately lost the ability to fight. Chen Pinggan did not lower his guard at all. He did not give up and fiercely hammered down, knocking his forehead against hers. The young girl staggered backwards. Chen Pinggan kicked her, and the girl who was heavily injured in the abdomen was like a kite with a broken string. She fell heavily on the limestone floor of the corridor 2 tables away. She struggled twice but was still unable to get up. Blood seeped out of the corner of her mouth, and her face was pale and pale. It was done in one breath without mercy. Zhu Lu pressed her elbows against the ground and endured the heart-wrenching pain. She tried her best to move her body backward. She tried to get as far away from the youth as possible, even if it was just an inch or a foot. Chen Pinggan looked around. Seeing that there was nothing unusual, he walked towards the young girl who had almost no ability to fight. His muscles were tense, but he was still cautious. Zhu Lu fell into great panic. She did not have time to wipe the blood from the corner of her mouth. She sobbed and explained, "Don't kill me, Chen Pinggan. I was just joking with you. Really. I didn't lie to you. If I wanted to kill you, why would I use these skewers? Besides, why would I want to kill you?" Chen Pinggan hit the nail on the head. "When we parted at Guanshui Street, you took your father, Zhu He, and said that you wanted to go to a weapon shop. Did you want to choose a weapon like a dagger that is easy to hide in your sleeves? I guess the shop was closed, so you had to use the skewers instead." Zhu Lu suddenly laughed. Her chest was violently moving up and down. She coughed violently. She covered her mouth. Scarlet blood was still seeping through the gaps between her fingers. She let go of her hand as if she had accepted her fate. She looked up at the youth who was looking down at her. She looked down and saw a pair of rough and cheap straw sandals. The young girl looked up again. She did not cry but laughed. She stared at the youth who was getting closer and closer to her. She laughed hoarsely. I didn't expect you to be as stupid as I thought. But I'm curious. How did you know that I wanted to kill you? The young girl raised her voice. Her originally beautiful face was twisted and crazy. Chen Pingan, before you kill me, can you let me know the reason before I die? Chen Pingan did not stop and asked back, why? Just as the young girl was about to sit up, Chen Pingan stepped on her forehead, causing the back of her head to heavily hit the bluestone floor. The young girl vomited out a large mouthful of blood. This time, she completely gave up on struggling to get up. Although in the depths of her heart, the greatest shame was that she could only lie down while a youth wearing straw sandals was standing and talking to her. Even sitting up had become an extravagant hope. Zhu Lu wiped the blood with the back of her hand and smiled. Do you still remember the letter that my family's second young master sent to the young miss? My family's young master is proficient in zither, chess, calligraphy, and painting. He is especially good at running script. Just like my young master's temperament, he is free and unrestrained. But before my young master left for the capital, he suddenly said that he wanted to learn regular script. He said that he wanted to learn how to follow the rules of the outside world. He wanted to start restraining his temperament. Chen Pingan squatted down and pried open her 5 fingers. He took out the 3 bamboo sticks and held them in his palm. Then, he sat on the bench in the corridor and stared at Zhu Lu expressionlessly. He did not want to give her any chance to cause trouble. But it was obvious that Zhu Lu killed him without any hesitation. But for Chen Pingan to do the opposite and kill her without any grudges, it was very difficult. This was because there was the red cotton-padded jacket girl, the straightforward man Zhu He, and the Li family's second young master in the middle. The moment Chen Pingan saw her walking over from the corridor, he knew that Zhu Lu was up to no good. Moreover, the young man had excellent eyesight. The girl's concealment was far from perfect. Chen Pingan could see her trembling eyelashes, clenching her teeth and puffing up her cheeks. She lowered her gaze and looked at him viciously. But Chen Pingan never thought that she would really kill someone. When the young girl mentioned her family's young master, her entire demeanor changed. She turned her head and looked at the straw sandals youth like a person looking at a dog. At that time, young Miss mentioned the contents of the letter to me for the first time. Young master said that Dallas fire beacon lit a fire of peace that stretched for thousands of li from the border all the way to the capital. But young Miss did not know, all of you did not know, that before this, young master had never told me about this matter of using the fire of peace at the border to report to the king. Young master told me some interesting stories and anecdotes. I remember them clearly since I was old enough to understand them, so at that time, I felt that something was wrong and asked young Miss for that letter. As expected, I saw through the mystery of the letter. In this world, only I, Zhu Lu, can see through it. Chen Pingan lowered his head and looked at the young girl whose face was filled with fanaticism. The youth did not say a word. Zhu Lu was immersed in her own world. At this moment, she became the arrogant and conceited servant of the Li family, the fledgling martial arts genius. She continued, then I carefully looked through it twice. After using it twice, I found the correct answer and solved the riddle that my family's young master deliberately left for me. She looked at the youth's cold and dark face. The young girl sneered, young Miss is an unpredictable child. Of course, she could not understand young master's good intentions. So from the beginning, young master did not place his hopes on young Miss. Instead, he chose me. That letter was full of more than 2,000 words. Almost all of it was written in running script. Only 7 words were written in regular script. The young girl almost laughed until tears came out of her eyes. She said intermittently, Dallas' surname is Zhugua, the eldest grandson of the Chen family. Killed the horse bandits, set the fire of peace, reported his safety, and received the title of nobility. Those 7 words were killed Chen Pingan, received the title of nobility. Scholars did not use knives to kill people. Chen Pinggan frowned. Zhu Lu covered her stomach, which was in constant pain. Her head was covered with cold sweat. But she still sneered. Have you never heard of the word title of nobility? Zhu Lu struggled to lean against the bench opposite the youth. This time, Chen Pinggan did not stop her. She looked at the youth who was called youngest uncle by her young miss. Do you know what I want to do the most besides killing you? Don't you know a lot of words? I just want to hand that letter to you. Maybe you'll feel ashamed of your inferiority, wondering how there can be such beautiful words in the world, such good literary talent. Even if you, Chen Pinggan, read it 10 times or 100 times, you still don't know that the real knowledge is only those 7 words. Isn't it funny? I think it's very funny. It's so funny that I almost die of laughter. Chen Pinggan sat quietly on the bench. The candid haws were scattered around him. No one cared about them. The youth looked at Zhu Lu and twitched the corner of his mouth. If it wasn't for Zhu He, you would really die of laughter today. Chen Pinggan stood up and said slowly, I know that you are actually saying these words to your father. And you struggled to get up this time to lure me to attack you. You want Zhu He to have no choice. Either I kill you or he kills me, right? Zhu Lu's face was gloomy. She did not say anything. Zhu He was standing in the corridor. His fists were clenched and the veins on the back of his hands were bulging. His face was full of pain. The man looked at the youth and the girl. One was his beloved daughter, and the other was a junior he admired. Zhu Lu stretched out her thumb and wiped the blood from the corner of her mouth. She lowered her head slightly, but her eyes were fixed on the youth with straw sandals. She turned her head slowly. For the first time, the girl was calm. She said to the familiar figure, with the temper of our miss, if she knows all this, even if I don't die, I will lose a layer of skin. There will be no hope for me in this life. Father, I beg you. Don't be soft-hearted. Take advantage of the fact that Alliance from the Wind Snow Temple hasn't come back yet. Hurry up and attack. Young Master said that indecisiveness will lead to chaos. Chen Pinggan suddenly turned around and bent down. He picked up a candid haw and put it in his mouth to chew. Then, the youth stood in the middle of the corridor and confronted Zhu He. The youth said softly to the girl, You will die. Zhu Lu's heart sank. Her father was about 15 steps away from Chen Pinggan. Although Chen Pinggan's martial arts realm was not high, the girl had seen his vigorous body. She was a little annoyed. Her father should not have appeared so openly in such a distant place. In a battle of life and death, there was no need to talk about the demeanor of a master. Zhu Lu turned her head and spat a mouthful of blood on the ground. Try it if you can. She looked at her father and reminded, Father, if you don't attack today, I will die in front of you. No matter what, take down Chen Pinggan first. After taking him down, if her father did not want to kill him, she would do it. Zhu Lu had already held her breath and was ready to deal with Chen Pinggan using her to threaten her father. Her father once said unintentionally that once she faced this lowly person from the Mud Bottle Alley, she would have a chance to win in a battle of martial arts. But in a battle of life and death, she would definitely die. At first, she did not believe it at all. But when she confronted the white python in Kedunshan Shiping, Zhu Lu was so scared that she lost her fighting spirit and could only wait for death. On the other hand, Chen Pinggan was above her in terms of courage and boldness, as well as his grasp of timing. This actually made her almost lose all hope in practicing martial arts. Once the state of mind collapsed, the road of martial arts would be considered to have come to an end. Therefore, even when they were at the border of Chiduan Mountain before entering Red Candle Town, the Lord of the Land and Wei Pai gave each of them a parting gift. Under Zhu He's strong request, she got the so-called Immortal's Secret Book of Purple Qi. It was a martial arts treasure that countless martial artists at the foot of the mountain dreamed of, but the girl did not have much heart. The matter of heart was easy to fall and difficult to mention since ancient times. How could the rough man Zhu He, a pure martial artist who was obsessed with martial arts, know all of this? However, the arrival of the letter was like a personal instruction from her young master. It was like charcoal in snowy weather, giving the girl who had comprehended the mystery of the letter a new hope. She told herself that she must practice martial arts. At the very least, she must become a martial arts grandmaster like her father. She must make great contributions on the battlefield so that it was only right for her to become a titled madam. This was especially true for the father and daughter duo. Now that they had the true Martial Mountain's hero's courage and the purple chi book written by the immortals on the mountain, it was just as Juhi had said. Now, he even dared to think about the glory of the seventh realm. Then why didn't she, Zhu Lu, dare to think about the glorious days that she did not dare to think about before? It was just that all the bright future and all the bright roads were built on a small premise. Chen Pinggan must die. Therefore, the girl, who knew that she was no match for the young man in a head-on fight, needed a secret attack. Just like how the young man exposed the truth, she needed a dagger. Unfortunately, the weapon shop was closed and she could not buy one. Coincidentally, her father, Zhu He, talked about apologizing to Chen Pinggan, and Chen Pinggan and Miss Li Baoping mentioned that they wanted to buy Candid Hawes. A dagger could kill, and the bamboo skewers of Candid Hawes could also be used in the hands of a martial artist at the peak of the second realm. Worried that the bamboo skewers would break easily, the girl used the excuse of bringing 2 skewers to Chen Pinggan and Li Baoping. She did not believe that she could not pierce through the young man's heart with the 3 skewers held together. They were interlocked. The vermilion deer's quick-wittedness was evident. The second young master of the Li family, who had never shown his face, was also evident in his ability to judge people and use people accurately. Because Zhu Lu's true strength lay in the fact that she found a way out for herself and a path of no return for Zhu He, who was at the 5th realm of martial arts, and for her father. She would die, or Chen Pinggan would die. Zhu He looked at the poor young man with his hair tied up with a jade hairpin and said 3 words that should have been said by his daughter sincerely, "I'm sorry." Chen Pinggan smiled and said, "It's okay. You chose your own path." The straw-sandaled youth's unnatural smile gave off a chilling feeling. This absurd feeling was especially clear to the girl not far away. Back then, in the territory of Chiduan Mountain, after sparring with Zhu He, the young man realized that the 3 chi dwellings in his body actually made the rampaging fire dragon of chi only dare to pass through the door and not enter. It was only then that Chen Pinggan realized that there were 3 extremely small wisps of sword chi hidden in those 3 places. They were connected to his mind and there was no barrier to using them. After that, the young man used a wisp of sword chi to blow up the white python's head. In order to survive, Chen Pinggan felt that it was not a loss to use another wisp of sword chi. However, the young man felt that the next time he used sword chi, he had to make a profit. It was not a good idea to always not make a loss. This was a vicious trap. Zhu Lu had said a lot. Chen Pinggan had only opened his mouth a few times and added together, there were only a few words. This was why the young man felt that he had to say something for himself and for the fairy sister who needed him to live. Otherwise, he would feel a little unhappy. The young man stepped forward with one straw sandal and moved back with the other. The young man bent his knees and his body fell down. He put his fingers together and pointed at the man in the distance. His lips moved slightly. Who knows if they were connected or if her ancestors were protecting her, but Zhu Lu was filled with terror and shouted, "No!" His scalp felt numb. He was a martial pathmaster, but his mind was in a mess and his limbs couldn't move at all. The young man chanted, "Sword, come." "110. Chen Pinggan's shoulder sank, and his aura stagnated. The strand of sword energy that was about to leave his chi residence was like an arrow on a bowstring, and it had to be released. However, after being abruptly patted on his shoulder, it was like a python coming out of the mountain, only to encounter a flood dragon blocking its path. The previously unstoppable momentum naturally stopped, and it temporarily chose to bide its time. "Hold it, hold it." A man wearing a bamboo hat stood beside Chen Pinggan. He put his arm around the teenager's shoulder and said with a laugh, "We're a big family that loves each other. Fighting and killing each other, what a scandal." Chen Pinggan raised his head. The man wearing the bamboo hat, who appeared and disappeared like a ghost, smiled at him. "Believe me, I'm Alliance." Chen Pinggan sighed. "I'll listen to you for now." Alliance only glanced at Zhu He. He didn't even bother to glance at the young girl, Zhu Lu. Languid, he said, using such a precious sword energy to kill Zhu, he is too wasteful. You're distressed, and I'm distressed for you. Besides, forget it, forget it. Let's not talk about these unpleasant things. In short, I, Alliance, won't be able to live with my conscience. You can consider this 18 Holtz qi circulation method as compensation. Chen Pinggan was about to withdraw his clasped fingers, but at this moment, Alliance released his hand from the teenager's shoulder. He took a step back, shook his head, and said with a smile, "This posture is too undignified. Let me teach you a powerful one. Stand firm." After the man in the bamboo hat lightly shouted, he bent his fingers and first knocked on Chen Pinggan's shoulder. Then, his hand flew, and he tapped the teenager's chest 7 or 8 times. At the same time, he used an immortal supernatural power that was even better than condensing sound into a thread. It directly stirred up ripples in the teenager's heart, and a series of thoughts rang out. Remember the origin of this qi in your body. Remember the names of all the qi residences and their circulation routes. The qi is like a dragon's vein, and it starts at the ancestor of all mountains, Linchong. This is the world's top qi residence for nurturing swords. Here is the first stop. Quickly pass through 3 mountains and 6 passes. Here is the second stop. These qi residences and qi residences are completely different from today's saying. They are the precious painstaking efforts of countless ancient sword cultivators. Remember it well? Alliance asked. Do you remember it? Sweat seeped out of Chen Pinggan's forehead. I remember most of it. Alliance smiled. That's about enough. If you hit your head and bleed, don't be afraid. This is the path that every sword cultivator must walk. Wait until you are familiar with the route. You can try to slow down the flow of qi. This is the most interesting part of the 18 stops. Yes, this is the knowledge that I, Alliance, came up with. Some people are full of admiration and praise me. They say that this point alone has raised the height of the path of the sword by a lot. Haha, it's a bit embarrassing. Chen Pinggan suddenly felt that this so-called 18 stops was most likely not much better than the Mountain Quaking Fist manual. Alliance seemed to see through the teenager's thoughts. He said with a deadpan expression, "Do I look like a swindler who speaks without thinking? I, Alliance, don't know what it means to brag in my life." Zhu, his mind had already pulled itself out of the mud, but his limbs were even stiffer than before. If he moved, he would die. This was the only thought in Zhu, his mind. This was the invisible intimidation brought about by that bamboo hat man. When that guy with a green saber and a gourd at his waist was your friend, you would think that he didn't look like an expert at all. But when this guy became your enemy, Zhu, he was so scared that his back was drenched in sweat. He was really scared out of his wits. In the distance, Zhu, he had already lost his mind. Nearby, Zhu Lu could only hear Chen Pinggan talking to himself. Liang then told Chen Pinggan telepathically, "It's good that the light boat can travel hundreds, thousands of miles in an instant, but it's even better if it can travel slowly, just like how the mountains don't grow taller for 100 years, or how the rivers accumulate water for 1,000 years, but the water level doesn't rise at all. In the future, with qi, you can focus on practicing this path. You can do it even when you're asleep." Chen Pinggan was puzzled. How do I know if I'll be able to do it after I'm asleep? Alliance crossed his arms and said with a smile, "When you reach the end of the water, you can sit and watch the clouds rise. When the time comes, you'll naturally know the answer." Alliance sat down on the bench. But as soon as he sat down, his expression changed. Chen Pinggan covered his forehead. Alliance calmly raised his butt and patted the candid hawthorns off his butt. He shifted his seat and placed his hands on the railing. He took a deep breath and finally looked at Zhu Lu for the first time. "You and your father need to return the hero's gallbladder and the purple qi book to me at Marshall Mountain. You also need to take out the stack of talisman passed down by the Li family. However, these talisman can only save one of you. Zhu Lu, I'll let you choose now. Do you want to leave Pillow Relay alive, or do you want your father?" Without waiting for Zhu Lu to speak, Zhu, he said in a deep voice, "Senior Alliance, please let Zhu Lu leave. I'm willing. This chapter is not finished. Please turn the page. You're tuning in to the Celestial War YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories,